She doesn't need to dress in these women clothes. They don't work for her. That was what she was saying. That's egregious for somebody who's operating the space that she is, especially one who's touting coalition.
You,
I was screaming a Hegel read-through before
President
this.
Sunday does not
Like,
believe in any morals. He does not have any values. The only thing he values is clout.
What
That's
about
all I need to
Chanterelle
say.
Somber? The reason why the reception to this has been so negative is precisely because there are so many people who understand this is actually not an unserious thing.
I don't think the reception has been all that negative, actually. I think that most people, when we're talking about gender, we're talking about like masculinity and femininity, and I think that most people, like, I think that pretty quickly, as soon as you start to take other identities that have literally nothing to do with masculinity and femininity and call them gender, you are immediately getting outside of what is reasonable.
Okay, but you're not like engaging with the other arguments about how all of this stuff that you're promoting might actually undermine healthcare. You're just giving a theoretical, whereas Sonia mentioned earlier like real examples of where these arguments are being used to prevent us from accessing healthcare. I've had to find spaces like this group chat with people like Brianna and Sonia and everyone else in there to talk about these things.
So now we are operating on turf logic, basically.
Well, and then
ironically,
what does that mean?
All right, Lucy, I'm gonna. So I'm gonna ask a favor.
Yes.
Don't try to immediately find a way to drop a maligning label onto something. Be a little more open-minded with the conversation and what's being said, because
it's not a label. It's one.
It's a buzzword.
It's a buzzword. It's people who lean more diversely on the spectrum.
Does it matter if it's a turf argument? Can we talk about whether or not it's a good or a bad argument instead, instead of whether or not we call it a turf argument?
I want to explore this. Do you think cis women are relatively privileged compared to us? Yes or no? Do you think cis women are relatively privileged?
And now we're doing oppression Olympics, guys. This is gonna, my head's gonna explode.
Dude, I'm not doing this f***ing oppression Olympics.
Black community. So does any community that's a minority. I'm sorry. No.
The trans community,
excuse me,
Stardust, just to be clear.
Excuse me, I'm not finished. I am
Take
not
a
finished.
chill pill,
I am not
Stardust.
finished. You
Wait,
cannot.
wait,
Bro,
let's
no,
have Stardust
you have
finish
to let
first.
me. You have to let me finish. You are wrong on the slur shit. Any community that is a minority community has a history of using slurs against them, appropriating them, and using them to shit on each other when they want to bitch about each other. I have seen it. I have seen it with the gay community. I've seen it with other communities of color. Okay. Secondly, what you're saying is not even analogous to what was going on in Brianna Wu's thing. If you wanted to make a better analogy, it would be a gay guy in a chat with a bunch of other gay guys getting mad at a gay guy who doesn't like him and calling him an F slur. That's what the equivalent would be. That doesn't make him all of a sudden unfit to be doing political advocacy just because he doesn't get along with one person.
What is a transvestite, Stardust? Because it's a little bit different in content than the
I said it's a slur. I said it is a slur.
It's not just a slur. It's not just a slur. What is a
Yes, what is the N-word, President Sunday?
No, I'm asking you. Like, what is the... No,
what is the N-word? It's more than just a... I think of Rocky Horror Picture Show.
So you think of a man in a dress, yes? You think of a man in drag. You think of somebody who is not, for example, a woman, who is dressed as a woman.
Yes. What do you think?
So if somebody,
is?
So if somebody,
what do you think the N-word is? The N-word is
the N-word is a mutilation of another word to make it seem gross and whatnot. That is then used.
This is
to
all
slur
for
a category of
dehumanization.
people.
All slurs are for dehumanization.
I really would like for you to
They're for
attempt to
degrading
operate at
people.
like an adult level for a few minutes, if you wouldn't mind. I would appreciate it.
I don't know if you're capable of operating on the same wavelength as the rest of the panel here. Your IQ might be too low.
Probably. Yeah. So when you're calling someone transvestite presenting, what you're actually saying is, oh, see that trans woman there that I used to work with that was complaining of a history of tacit or quiet transphobia while working at the Young Turks. Yeah, she looks like a man in a dress. She needs to wear normal clothes because she's slim anyway. She can just dress normally, right? She doesn't need to she doesn't need to dress in these women clothes. They don't work for her. That was what she was saying. That's egregious for somebody who's operating the space that she is, especially one who's touting coalition building. She's encouraging people in the background who are bigoted towards other trans people to be more and more encouraged in those views. She's actually sowing very strong dissent within the trans community, within the community she's supposedly trying to build coalitions with. And she's encouraging the absolute worst elements.
So one of my moderators said Benny uses the word transvestite on their OnlyFans. Is that true? Can somebody
Is it? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know that it would matter as to whether or not people find it right or wrong for Brianna Wu to use it. Like, if Benny's wrong, Benny's wrong too. But that wouldn't change anything for the rest of them.
Yeah. Brianna
it'd be sort of like just on the N-word thing.
She's admitted it was mean.
On the N-word thing, as an example, it would be sort of like if somebody called somebody else that, maybe somebody like Barack Obama did, and that other person had happened to use it in like a different key in like a piece of music they wrote, maybe in self-description even, right?
No, okay, so no, that's not what I'm talking about. President Sunday, what I'm talking about, first off, you got that
that
wrong
is actually.
with
That's
Benny.
kind of exactly
No, that's not what I'm talking about. Let me finish, okay? First off, you got the thing with Benny wrong. You got the thing with Benny wrong.
What did I get wrong with Benny?
Because Brianna Wu was not talking about Benny as a whole. They were commenting on a specific picture of Benny.
Yeah,
and they were
a picture that
one
this person took, a picture that this person took to show like, hey, look how good I'm looking today. Brianna Wu goes into her group chat with 21 other people. A lot of people with audiences, by the way. What do you mean?
I mean, I would say that the picture was fairly representative of Benny's general representation.
Who are you to say that, Stardust?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't fundamental to her. It was a critique of the way that she looked.
Sorry,
and
I just
I'm
had
not
to kick
saying that
Sim.
that's right.
It wasn't just a critique of the way that she looked. It wasn't just a critique of the way that she looked, Stardust.
Wait,
she didn't just say, ooh, that dress isn't working for you. She said, that trans woman, she looks like a man in that outfit. She needs to wear something else.
Yes, but it was still a critique of that outfit. It was still a critique of that outfit. I'm not saying that it's right, but I am saying that it is not about her fundamental character. It is about the way that she appeared in that photo.
Yeah,
now,
I don't think anybody was saying she was commenting on the
state
state of her soul.
Let me finish what I'm saying. The second part of what I'm saying here is that, okay, first I said, right, that this is not a critique of her as a person fundamentally. It is a critique of the way that she was dressed. And it wasn't right, and Brianna Wu acknowledges that it wasn't right. Secondly...
so fuck off. What are you going on about? She already apologized. She acknowledged wrongdoing already. It's over.
Wait a minute. No, secondly, yes, we all do mean things, behind closed doors. We all say mean things. But if you want to talk about, like, using slurs, I have friends who, I have a friend who, wait, let me finish. I have a friend
let me finish.
who will call her brother, the N-word with a hard
Let me
R.
finish speaking, please. Wait,
let's have Stardust actually finish.
I think her point. I think her point is that it's not like necessarily transphobic. It's just her commenting on her looks, just as other women comment on their looks.
So we agree.
I would say it's not transphobic. I would say it's definitely not transphobic.
Okay, maybe
it's just
we can all
like
look at the photo and make up our own mind. What do you think?
Or we could also look at the remainder of the messages, because that's a page that we're arguing about right now.
Okay, I just freed up everybody.
I just think this is the third one. This is the third time that President Sunday has tried to blow up somebody's career.
So to be clear.
This is the third time.
So to be clear, in your judgment, Stardust, that person who wanted that conversation to be known because they wanted people to know what kinds of things Brianna Wu actually believed, contrary to her public-facing statements. That person
has leaked a lot of stuff. That person is a drama chaser.
Really? Who are they?
Yeah. I'm not going to name them. But they leaked many things.
But they're not getting any drama from this.
Oh, they are.
I'm the one who posted
all the drama unfold. They're seeing all the drama unfold. They wanted that.
No, I really don't think so.
Yes, I do think so. And I think that you are a useful idiot. You're a useful idiot.
I think what happened.
I cannot believe how low IQ you are. I expected better of you. You have you present yourself as like a fucking professor aesthetic. I have no fucking idea. Do you have a fucking PhD? You have a bunch of books behind you. Have you read any of them? Clearly not.
I got a duck.
Holy
It's a
shit.
banana.
So, President Sunday, what do you think it is that should happen? I think that's like an important question to ask here.
I think all centrists should be swiftly and summarily. No.
Jesus.
What's supposed to happen? Nothing. What
he
should
doesn't
happen?
want people to look at Brianna as an ally. He wants them to know what her real feelings are about these things, and he wants them to understand where she really stands.
And isn't that fair at the end of the day?
Maybe not so much to in that sense. Like if people still want to ally with her, so be it. But I think people should be aware of what her actual
feelings
are.
You would say, I'm saying
well,
you would say she's
matters.
not an ally.
Here's why it
different
matters.
women you've tried to ruin their careers because they were smarter than you.
Destiny is a girl's name. True. So when it comes to Brianna in particular, Brianna is someone who's trying to mold policy, who's making strategic suggestions to people and saying you should do this, not do this. You should not advocate for this. Sometimes for
and
entire
her
categories of people.
advice is good.
I wasn't finished.
Are you sure you're not intimidated
Sometimes, like don't advocate for these whole identity groups.
Okay, energy drink.
Things like that. Sure. So when she's doing so, for that advice to be taken on good faith, you need to know what the goal is. What are her actual motives? And if it turns out behind the scenes that she has contempt for the groups that she's dropping, we can't trust that she's actually making this advice in their interest. It seems like she just doesn't care.
Again, what I will.
That's why you need that consonance between what she says in private, in these conversations with other people when she thinks you're not looking, and what she says.
But you don't
public,
get to say who gets to appropriate the word or not.
President Sunday, you have no idea. Like, look, you in public will insult people for their intelligence, and then you're claiming the moral high ground here.
Yeah,
seriously,
you're dumb.
like why? Why would you?
Because you're dumb,
bro. You have tried to ruin multiple people's. You've tried to ruin multiple people's
President
careers.
Sunday, I have a serious question for you.
President Sunday. Let me just reiterate one last thing, and then I will let everybody else have the floor, because I just don't want to be involved in this anymore, okay? President Sunday, let me just tell you guys, okay? President Sunday is only part of this because he used to be he used to be pro Gamergate back in the day, and he knows that it is still in.
I wasn't in Gamergate.
It's still in to shit on Brianna Wu, and he knows that he can get clouded by shitting on Brianna Wu. He knows that he can do it. He knows that he can still get clout off of it today.
What are you talking about?
That is the reason why.
How do you even know that? I wasn't even on YouTube back then.
It's the reason why
I think I was like, I might have been in high school still.
And tried to blow up their fucking career.
It's a weak accusation.
There is nothing.
Okay, but you know what? But you know what I didn't do? Hey, no, that's good. That's great. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't go canvassing for a segregationist like Wu did.
Okay, so the issue that
I felt... a question, please.
But also, by the way, very quickly, and I'll let you ask, please. If you're all right.
You're fucking retarded, President Sunday. President retarded.
Okay, you're not contributing anymore. You're not contributing anything.
You're a Friday.
I like Fridays.
Fridays are great.
Wait, Stardust. Do you wait? It's not
Fridays
like I
are
don't
fun.
doubt you or anything, right? But do you have any receipts for like him like?
Oh, I mean, I like back in college, I absolutely did watch Sargon, but I wasn't watching Sargon for Gamergate. That shit was boring.
Like even
I watched.
for right now,
you were a fan, and you know that it is in to shit on her. Because all of the ex
I didn't really pay attention.
All of the GGers came out of the fucking woodworks to shit on her.
I wasn't.
Is he still in contact with
Stardust, what are you talking about? I've been pretty fair-minded here, have I not?
I'm not talking about you, Tack. I am talking about all the Twitter retards.
Wait, Attackion, what the fuck? Stop. You're not. Okay, you're.
So very quickly.
You are not representative of all
from
of
about till 2016. I came from a conservative background, and I watched a lot of Sargon because there's a lot of friction between, liberal lefty stuff in university campuses and people from that culture. And over time, I educated myself out of that. So in 2016,
and you know where the clout is. You knew the clout was in shitting on NSE, and you know the clout is shitting on Brianna Wu because all the GGers will come out of the woodwork. You care
That's
about
not clout.
nothing.
What are you talking about?
You don't care about
I was streaming a Hegel
Sunday,
read through before
President
this.
Sunday does not believe in any morals. He does not have any values. The only thing he values is clout.
What about Chanterelles?
Stardust. It's not like I don't believe it, right? But like, if you would lower your decibels by like a few 20 or 30, like. I
can't when he's always interrupting me. He was always butting in.
You said you're gonna leave it to other people. May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, Nine, go.
Mr. Sunday, if anybody were to reappropriate hateful language, which group do you think is most, like, suited, entitled to do that? Would it be the group that language targets, and thus it would be empowering for them, or the group who uses that slur and has traditionally done so to weaponize it?
I don't think it's a reappropriation if it's a weaponizing of an ongoing term that has outdated connotations, because the purpose of it is to invalidate the person by way of their appearance, to say this person looks like a man, especially when you are acting in a professional or a public capacity and you're representing yourself as someone conscientious of that. And this is another crucial point, when you are castigating other people for doing things of an identical kind. So Brandon Wu has gone out of her way.
She castigates people for public things.
She does. Well, not just for public things. She castigates people for speaking to trans people in a dehumanizing way, period. And that there's no excuse for people in politics to do so. This is yet precisely what she's doing. Why?
Well,
because fundamentally she's a chameleon. She is whoever she's talking to at the moment.
This is why Startup brought up the N-word, because the N-word was dehumanizing.
Yeah.
But black people found a way to say it in a non-dehumanizing way.
Yeah, that wasn't used in a dehumanized.
Black people still use the N-word with the hard R to degrade each other. The fuck are you guys talking about? You clearly don't hang out with black people.
Thank you,
I'm not saying they don't. I'm saying they reappropriated the language.
They
and if anybody is suited,
people will still use that.
I gotta go soon. Does anybody else want to ask me something before I go?
I want to ask Mr. Sunday a question.
Jenny Matrix then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Sunday, fuck you slimy piece.
Wait,
of
is that
shit.
is that all you have to say? It has to be more than an insult, right?
Is that all you want?
Is that all I have to say? It's like fucking 4 words.
Is that all you got?
How about somebody who was already here? Because we already know
Jenny
Matrix.
Now that the person whose DMs you leaked has shown up, suddenly you don't want to talk.
Hey, Jenny Matrix, do non-binary people exist?
Do non-binary people exist? Not in the sense that you would think they do.
What does it say on your Twitter?
You what?
Huh?
What does it say on your Twitter?
It says that non-binary. Okay, so in a tweet where I was cramming.
How about you just read it?
Yeah, sure. I'll read the whole tweet for you. It's point-based.
You what?
Non-binary is not a real thing. Transgender is a meaningless category. Self-ID is a terrible idea. If you're not transsexual, you're not trans. Most trans activism is a complete joke, as you're proving right now. And the trans movement has been hijacked and subverted by gender abolitionists like yourself, you slimy scumbag. The way that people think non-binary people exist today is not how third gender or fourth gender people existed throughout history.
Food shops, I'm so sorry. But I do have to go, and there were people here who were waiting. I would like to answer a question from somebody who was already here.
Okay,
My
sure.
question is this. Where were you inaugurated, and who can I call to verify that information?
I was not inaugurated in a country where the rule of law is in place. I rule by will. Ultimately, the presidential title is just a vestige of the previous regime.
Sunday, do you understand? Do you understand that when somebody has been harassed,
sorry, can you start that conversation? Can you start the sentence again?
Somebody needs to check his creds.
I missed the opening of that sentence, Stardust.
Okay, so do you understand? Do you understand that when somebody has been harassing a person for a long time, sometimes a bad thing is going to happen. Wait a minute. Sometimes a bad thing. Excuse me. Let me finish. Sometimes a bad thing is going to happen, and this person is maybe going to say something really bad about them in a private message that they don't expect is going to get out. It's not indicative of the entire community of trans people, but it is out of frustration.
If I was in a public beef with a black person, I wouldn't resort to using an anti-black slur. Not in public
but you're
either.
not black.
If I was, I wouldn't use an F slur to refer to a gay person either in that key. Like there's certain keys that you don't do these kinds of things in. And if for example,
communities do it all the time. Black people call each other the N-word with the hard R all the time.
If, for example, the function of it is not to say in an offhand way, hey, like she is another slur later on that is used in that key. That is a reappropriative. So when she refers to other people in the group as these are the good T slurs or whatever, like that's different. But when you're specifically,
do you even know that? Do you know? Do you know that those words are not? Do you not know? Do you really know that those words are not used?
I'm assuming she's friends with the. I'm sorry.
Do you really know that those words are not used by that community?
I didn't say they weren't used by that community.
So then, what is your fucking point?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I was presuming I was speaking to somebody with a basic grasp of English. Maybe I was mistaken.
Oh, I thought I was speaking to somebody who actually knew how to put a sentence together.
Tom, do you have a question?
Together.
Yeah, so Sunday, it seemed like going through most of the logs that most of what Brianna Wu was talking about in them was neo-pronouns. It seemed like she had a bigger issue with neo-pronouns than with specifically non-binary people. I guess my mic or my camera just unplugged, but yeah.
Well, what are neo-pronouns for? What did we do?
So I think that this is indicative of her having an issue with gender abolition, not necessarily non-binary people.
Well, what do you suppose non-binary means?
Well, non-binary means that you don't fit into the binary, but I don't think that.
See, here's the trick.
It depends on who you're asking, but yeah.
Yeah, certainly. But if gender and sex are separate, then sex should not necessarily, therefore, limit the range of gender expressions that are possible. And so maybe you can be a gender abolitionist, for example, but still fit that mold, or even say everybody who lives only fits either a male or a female gender expression. Or it could be the case that we lack the vocabulary to describe people who have gender expressions that are outside of that categorization scheme. They can exist or they cannot. That's going to be a historical incident, right? There may be at some point in time born only people of like some subset of expressions, and some just will just not appear for whatever reason, so on and so forth. When you're talking about
what? Stop.
Are you okay?
Yeah, sorry, my mic's messing up. Something dropped onto my stuff, and my camera unplugged and everything.
It's really, I don't him. It's hard to listen to a wet towel go on for as long as it has. It really is.
I feel so sorry for you. So when you're talking about, for example, when you're talking about ridiculing people with neo-pronouns or calling them insane, or wanting to take away the helm from them, because that's an express statement of going against that group's interests. What you're doing effectively is you're saying, yeah, people who have gender expressions outside of a binaristic thing, we don't have any respect for that, because ultimately it's what neo-pronouns are. They're ways to particularize gender expressions outside of the binary.
Is it though?
They, them is the way to be ambiguous.
I don't think that these people actually.
Okay,
yeah, I don't believe that these people actually believe that you can exist outside of the gender binary. I think most people believe that you are going to.
They believe that. They believe that very strongly.
But they're not
maybe
trying to get rid
non-binary
of
people
gender.
do, but I'm talking about people like Brianna Wu, like me. Most of us believe that they're going to be more androgynous than anything else, but they still exist within the gender binary.
Right.
Okay, but they don't. So when we're talking about the gender binary, what we're effectively saying, and the reason why we have a distinction between sex and gender, is that the range of ways in which you can express in a gender fashion in that way is limited by whether or not you have a penis or a vagina. And essentially, when we call people a man or a woman, that actually continues into that, where we're referring to people as penis bearers of the spirit, so to speak. But some people don't fall into that categorization. And that doesn't mean, therefore, that they're simply androgynous. Sometimes they have like very, very particular forms of expression. And that doesn't mean that the range is simply endless. Like it's distinctly possible that there's some that are more reasonable than others, or that start to lose meaning at a certain degree of they become sort of abstract or whatever, or something like that, to the point where maybe the language of gender is no longer appropriate, and maybe that's simply the case. But no, absolutely, there are people who really believe this. There's a lot of people with these identities, a good number. The reason why the reception to this has been so negative is precisely because there are so many people who understand this is actually not an unserious thing.
I don't think the reception has been all that negative, actually. I think that most people, when we're talking about gender, we're talking about like masculinity and femininity, and I think that most people, like, I think that pretty quickly, as soon as you start to take other identities that have literally nothing to do with masculinity and femininity and call them gender, you are immediately getting outside of what is reasonable.
Well, no, because masculinity and femininity are themselves gendered categories, right?
Sunday,
like when we're talking about gender, we're talking.
Do you think it's valid if somebody says their gender is a Pokemon?
If their gender is a Pokemon, well, Pokemon is a brand, so that's a little bit odd. But like, for example,
but they're outside the gender binary.
Sorry?
They're outside the gender binary.
Well, the identity wouldn't be literally saying that they are the fictional. Let's assume that somebody did that. If they were being serious and they were using that to represent their gender identity, that would be a label for a particularization of their gender expression. That would not be trying to say I am literally the fictional character from this IP, right?
Do you understand the point though that like if we're making pronouns
No,
for
if I'm
every
honest.
single, excuse me, let me finish.
Mm-hmm.
If we are making and using pronouns for every single gender identity that is outside the binary, whether that's deer, whether that's Pokemon, whether that's fucking a star gender or cloud gender,
you will be
right?
relieved to
Wait,
know that
let me finish.
nobody.
Let
You
me
will be
finish.
relieved
Let
to
me
know.
finish.
Let
Let
us,
me
you've been
finish.
cutting
Let
people
me
off
finish.
like crazy.
Let me finish.
Wait.
Wait.
After this,
I
Nine
didn't even
will
finish
ask
what
her
I was
question.
saying.
Yeah, but after you. I'm saying after you. Okay, go.
Okay. If you can you understand that if we have to go and use neo pronouns for every single person who says that they want to go by neo pronouns, who identifies as something like star gender or cloud gender or Pokemon gender outside the gender binary, that we are going to have endless amounts of things to remember, and it's just not.
You have to remember people's
It is
names.
not.
What's the
Yes,
problem?
but remembering somebody's name and remembering like the pronouns of every single non-binary person outside of the gender binary who goes by Pokemon,
She just doesn't
Cloud,
want to.
How many are
static,
people actually? Hang
TV.
on. How many are people actually using? As far as I'm aware,
Well,
we have
they're
exactly
specifically in
really
that chat.
Stardust.
We're
Stardust. How
specifically
many
talking
people can
not
you
about.
even?
Wait,
Stardust.
the people.
Stardust.
The reason why I'm bringing this
How
up
many
is
people
because
can you name?
specifically in that chat they were talking about deer gender. They were not talking about just
Doe's
any
not deer gender.
non-binary.
Doe
They
is
were
not deer
talking about
gender.
deer gender. They were
Doe is
talking
not
about
deer
Doe.
gender. Doe's not deer gender. Doe goes by
Okay,
it its
what?
pronouns because Doe is non-binary and operates outside of that spectrum. The deer
Mm-hmm.
gender thing is a joke. Doe's not deer gendered. Doe was making a self-effacing joke because Doe uses a deer aesthetic in their art and whatnot.
Okay,
yeah, I think that back to kind of what I was saying.
They were still
But that kind of is though. So
I think
no, they were referring
trans.
to that. If they believe
Come on,
that Doe is deer gender,
trying to
then
like
Doe
go down
is
a
deer
line
gender
of
in their head.
questioning, and it keeps going off. Like I think the point is that people who actually have gender dysphoria are trying to fight to be seen as the genders that fit within the binary currently, and then there's people who are saying, well, actually, let's just kind of ignore the binary and come up with new genders that have absolutely nothing to do with gender.
They're not saying that at all. They're not saying. No, hang on. Because people very quickly. I do want to reply to
because
this.
as soon as you believe non-binary is even a possible thing,
no. This is an important point that Tom's bringing up.
We're talking about needing people to
just as
conform
very
to gender
quickly.
roles.
So sorry, I'm going to cut you off at Ninetales. I couldn't tell who you were talking. So, Tom, very quickly, so you do bring up an important point. Nobody's advocating for disregarding people, for example, who have dysphoric feelings and identify with a sex other than their birth.
I understand that, but that's still part of the process, though. Like, that's part of the process of their acceptance, is actually people understanding the difference between sex and gender and understanding that they do fit what it is that we understand gender to mean. But then there's other people who are saying, well, actually, no, let's like kind of wipe gender. We want to fit outside of what it is that you're calling gender. And we're coming up with new identities that we just call gender, but have absolutely nothing to do with gender.
Tom, gender abolition is not abolishing people who are gendered. People are raised in a system that genders them.
I understand
that. So people develop to have these identities, and so on and so forth. Gender abolition is not saying that those people are invalid and that therefore that whole thing should just be ignored. Gender abolitionists are basically saying that these gender ranges should not be prescriptive for.
But those identities fit on a spectrum of masculinity to femininity.
What?
But those identities fit on a spectrum of masculinity to femininity.
Well, not all. They don't.
They don't. These identities have literally nothing to do with masculinity and femininity. They are denying.
Okay.
But why would you limit it to femininity and masculinity, which is really just to say vagininess and penisness?
We're not limiting to that. It's just what it is. If I say I'm a football fan, it's limited
I wasn't
to
finished. You don't know my question.
that are available.
You don't know what I was going to say. You jumped in because you're all excited because this is Stardust. Shortcut to more than 20 viewers again. When you're saying that like people are tied within the spectrum of femininity and masculinity, what you're effectively saying is that the sexual characteristics with which people are born limits the range of types of people that they can be. But for example, there are asexual people who are trans, and so on and so forth. There's not this specific relationship between one's sexual equipment and one's gender expression. The gender abolitionist movement is effectively saying, regardless of your body type, that should not be a restriction, which, by the way, includes for people who have a body type that is torturous to them. That should not be restrictive of what kinds of gender expressions should be permissible. So it's not an abolition or an elimination of gendered people or existing genders. It's an abolition of the hegemony of gender as a sorting mechanism that is delimited by biological sex. Does that make sense?
I think that's perfectly acceptable within the binary, though. I don't like you're saying that as though it's we're incapable of doing that within the binary. But these people are bringing new identities that have absolutely nothing to do with the binary.
Well, they aren't new
and
identities.
calling
They
them
have
gender
them.
now.
They're present, right?
No,
they have
yes,
those
they have
identities.
the they have the identities, but they are not gender, and they are calling them gendered identities.
Well,
when they have
what is
gender.
Hang on. What is gender, Tom?
Well, you guys
Masculinity and femininity.
No. Those are genders. But what is gender?
Wait, hold on. Zonia wants to get her 2 cents in.
You also said I could go like a while back.
Yeah,
I wanted to go for a really long time.
I would actually like to talk to Zonia. This is unfortunate, but I do have to go. I was actually not.
Oh, he's running, guys. He's running. It's President.
No, I just missed the stream.
Yeah, President Run.
I've got like.
We do need to talk.
What is it? 9:21. I can do 5 minutes if you can go quick.
No, wait.
So
why do you not think
so Sunday?
But I think Ninetales is waiting.
Okay, I want to get something real quick.
But I think Ninetales is waiting.
Yeah, I know, but you got 5 minutes. Okay, let's do Ninetales.
You can do 1 minute there quickly.
Who's talking?
My question isn't for Sunday, so Zonia go first, actually.
Okay,
there we go.
Thank you. Okay, so do you recognize that there is a difference between what someone feels is optimal to and effective to currently advocate for versus like, say, like working against non-binary identities?
If you're saying to people that you don't regard specific subsections at the very least of non-binary people as valid, or if you're calling them insane and agreeing with that, or if you're, for example, ridiculing somebody for their non-binary identity, someone in particular, unprovokedly, and if in addition to this you are complaining to that group of people that you're addressing that these people are corrupting the purity of your movement, and then you're going afterwards to the public and saying, no, I unequivocally defend these people, I think that's deeply disingenuous, and I think that's a deep betrayal, probably the most damning kind of betrayal you can make as a political figure, is to be secretly working against the interests or speaking against the interests of the people you're supposedly representing, and then lying to them afterwards and saying that, no, I'm actually 100% on your side.
Well, if their public advocacy seems to be working in the favor of, then that's pretty good, right? I mean, politicians are two-faced all the time, right?
I don't think her... Well, no, that's not an excuse, Zanya. By that logic, you would have voted for Nixon after Watergate. When your public representatives are lying about their purposes and their goals, their statements afterwards that, by my highfalutin coalition, I wasn't finished speaking.
Let him finish. Let him finish because he doesn't have time.
By my highfalutin coalition building among goddamn Twitch poll streamers, we're going to somehow bring about the revolution, and you all be saved along with us anyways. If leaving aside the fact that, no, unfortunately, her somehow involving herself in the canvassing efforts of Vosh and Destiny, that's not going to secure anything for anybody. Let's assume that it did. If she is making prescriptions that on a surface level, more than a surface level actually, but on a surface level appear to be against the interest of a subset of that group, but she claims they're in the interest of that group because if the whole succeeds, they will succeed with it. If she's secretly telling people she doesn't give a shit about that group, that's a problem, because it means that group is being misled by somebody who is claiming to speak for them, who is actually operating against their own interests or doesn't care about them. So they're lying when they say this will be good for you. They just don't give a shit about those people.
Well, so there's a very lengthy history of us shit talking each other behind the scenes constantly. It happens.
That's not an excuse.
Doesn't matter how pure of a leftist you are, it always happens. But if your public advocacy is working in the benefit of the LGBTQ community, then I think that's a pretty damn good thing.
I think you would have to be monumentally naive. If you're not naive at this point.
I don't think so. And if you just don't have, if you're not ready to, fully adopt on all of sort of the new, more modern, open-minded sort of policies,
then don't lie.
then
don't lie to the people you're representing.
Then it's fine to not want to have to take that on right now and to be a little bit more pragmatic.
But
she's lying.
Not.
Look,
she's lying.
I look. I haven't gone through.
You don't deny that she's lying.
I haven't gone through all of your stuff, but
There's
I do know.
3 pages. It's not that much.
But I do know that there is always this is what I'm advocating for, and then there's sometimes I don't always agree with the people that are in this particular subset or something, right?
Well, it's a problem because one of the people she doesn't agree with is called Brianna Wu on Twitter. So if she's saying I unequivocally support non-binary people, and then she's equivocating on supporting non-binary people or outright complaining about their influence.
About Doe in that situation.
Yeah. When she was talking about
Doe was dear gender.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing.
So I just think it's not okay to question beliefs in private among people who you can have those conversations.
Well, also,
I do have to run,
individuals.
unfortunately. Food shops. We'll continue this later, Zonya.
Right.
Yeah.
But I do need to leave. My partner just came home, so
yeah, I do. Sunday, I do wanna talk one-on-one with you about. Okay.
I will.
I do want to hold on. I do want to talk one-on-one with you about transmedicalism sometime. But yes, I'll say goodnight to you right for now, and thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, for now, good night. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
President Ronde.
Farewell.
How does it feel to be like a large monotone man with the personality of a rock?
He's still here.
So anyways, I have a protective question.
Oh, he is? Oh, I don't care. I don't give a fuck.
What were you gonna?
I love you all.
Good night.
All right.
What were you saying?
So my
not
question
just
for
a
Tom
monotone
is,
voice, also slow wit. Large man, slow wit, personality of a rock.
yeah, we get it.
In a monotone
we get it. You're
voice.
mad.
Okay.
Yeah, we get it.
I think to me the biggest
Mr.
argument
Foolery.
should have been the stuff about the
Mr.
neopronoun stuff, because he made it sound like arguing that she's criticizing neopronouns throughout almost all of it, and then he says, well, you're criticizing neopronouns, therefore you're not a non-binary ally, and I don't think that actually makes sense. You can criticize neopronouns and still be on board with non-binary people.
And the other problem with that,
Jesus Christ.
I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time.
What the fuck is the 3D after what the fuck? Jesus Christ. Okay,
I really want to get something out of the way. Hold on.
I know you do, but
I just want to qualify something real quick.
I've been waiting longer than you have at this point.
All right, sure. Sorry.
Thank you. Go ahead. So, Mr. Foolery, what do you have any objections to the claim that the gender abolition movement is more about getting rid of the need for people to conform to gender roles than about getting rid of gender altogether? Like, nobody's claiming that trans women need to not exist and we need to abolish gender that way. You can recognize that, right?
I agree that is what is stated, yes.
But you think that you have better knowledge on how it works?
I think that as long as the patterns exist, as long as males act more like males and females act more like females, and they have separate interests and separate body language and different things that they do, they are going to have patterns that the rest of us recognize. And as soon as we recognize those patterns, we're going to categorize them as separate things, and we just call that gender.
So this is non-binary because we also see that there are some people who don't have masculine or feminine traits at the end of the day.
I don't agree with that. I do not think that that's true. I have never seen a person who did not have gendered characteristics.
That's your subjective
experience. It's not. I have never. I've never seen a person who did not have gendered characteristics ever in my entire life. And I've had a lot of people say that they are agender. I've seen people say that they are non-binary. They might have a more mixed bag of gendered characteristics where they come off as more androgynous. And that makes sense if that's what we want to talk about when we're talking about non-binary people. But those people are not absent of any gendered characteristics.
They're talking about having a gender absent experience as a person.
As like an identity, you mean?
Both.
Well, sure,
as like an internal experience or as like an intentional identity?
I guess mostly as an internal experience, but also feeling most validated when gender isn't a part of what they're doing.
Well, gender can be very confining. So, yeah, a lot of people will want to try to define themselves in a way that allows them to not be as confined by society's gendered
The
rules.
key point is that unless you have any data that it's impossible for people to feel non-binary, you are confining them.
Wait,
to
that's
this
not
thing
what
where
I'm
no matter
saying.
what they do,
That's
what
not
they
what I
say
said.
about themselves has no meaning.
I believe in non-binary people. I just believe that they're androgynous. I believe that they have a more mixed bag of gendered characteristics.
Both feminine non-binary people as
one
well as
I
masculine
understand
non-binary
this,
people.
tomfoolery. As I
Being
understand this,
non-binary-
this means you're saying that you think that agender people don't exist, but
I do not believe in agender. I think that's literally impossible.
I would like to do one little quick qualification. I don't know how much strongly people feel about this, but like people often like to tie neopronouns to like the trans community, but neopronouns are something that predate really even how modern understanding of transgender people, and there are plenty of cis people who use pronouns beyond the basic she, they, them. So it's something to keep in mind that it's just because someone's using neopronouns doesn't necessarily mean that they're trans.
Well, maybe we just need to address those next.
I think there's an issue where people often talk about neopronouns without understanding how they are used in practice. Many people will think that neopronoun users are absolutely insistent and get extremely angry at all times of which their preferred pronoun is not used, whereas a lot of the times they may have a hierarchy of pronouns, and a pronoun such as fey, fair might be their favorite pronoun, but it's kind of almost honorific when it's used. That's a thing that I think people miss.
Yeah,
a lot of experience I've had too, by the way.
Yeah, a lot of times when we talk about non-binary people, oftentimes you're going to find that there's not really necessarily one set of pronouns that they use specifically, but it's more multiple sets of pronouns that they use, and a lot of times it's just one that they like above all. Well, the rest, and
the problem is worse than I thought.
I agree. I think that we have trouble though. Like my issue a lot of times, and this is not, I don't think this is actually representative of the non-binary community nor the trans community, but it is fairly common with online trans people, where they will have a gender identity that does not seem to drive their gender expression, and what it is that we would expect to see based on your identity is not actually seen by other people. And there's this cognitive dissonance between what you're telling us your identity is versus what we actually see in front of us, and we would expect normally the identity to align with the expression. And I think that lots of times these are, I understand that they're like, when the reason I bring up gender abolition is because I do think that these are like intentionally done a lot of times to try to break down gendered barriers, to try to like give people more room to express themselves. But I think we start to lose meaning in what it is that we're talking about when we use words to kind of categorize these things in the first place.
I think that somebody who says their gender is mudkip is saying something that is meaningful but requires more context. Somebody might just see them as being a girl with blue hair who and short hair and think, oh, this person's feminine or this person's androgynous. But they are trying to express something about their identity, and I don't really perceive it as being a problem that they are expressing this part of their identity, as it's usually done within trans spaces. People very rarely try to enforce this kind of discussion outside of trans spaces, and I very frequently Yeah.
The problem is that it undermines the entire concept of gender. You're saying that these things are nothing but a matter of self-identity. They're self-referential categories.
Precisely.
A man is
Yeah,
anyone who identifies
precisely.
as a man. A woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. So
How are you
therefore,
going to
it's a worthless
justify
category.
healthcare?
Doesn't mean
How are you going to
anything.
justify
Yeah.
Well, that's a
healthcare
hold
for
on.
That's
That's
the
a
most
different
important thing.
Shut the fuck up.
All right,
And these
one
people want to
time,
do this
one time.
in the name of transsexual people. They want to use us, people who medically transition, of gender dysphoria, to push this ideology that we all now have to conform to, or you get your private group chat DMs leaked.
Well, like the big problem that I see, like because to like build off of both of your points, Stardust and Jenny, is that so like Stardust, you're saying like getting healthcare, like it's a big priority, it's a big thing. There's like actionable things, and these are some things that through science we can actually win arguments on and win politicians on to get them to actually provide support for transition and for HRT and such, right? But then in addition to that, what like Jenny is talking about, the problem that we're having, and this is something I wanted to push back on President Sunday about, but there actually is a very concerted effort to say that if you're a binary trans person, you're a trans medicalist. And if you don't want, if you're currently focused on advocating for the medical needs of binary trans people, because it's a very valid fight and it's a desperate thing right now, that we're actually losing in some battleground states, you suddenly are labeled as a trans medicalist, and then you're maligned as being Nazi adjacent and shit.
There is no such effort like that whatsoever. Binary trans people are completely accepted within the trans community. And as far as healthcare goes, similarly...
Beg to differ. We've actually seen evidence to the contrary quite aggressively right now in at least online trans spaces, which is where all this stuff is blowing up, which is what triggered this whole panel in the first place.
Also,
I've never seen that in any online trans spaces at all.
Yeah, if you don't look for it, you probably won't see it because it's easier to blind yourself to things like that.
You sound like you're deeply entrenched in a community that nobody else can relate to.
Yeah, I want to bring this back though to what Jenny was saying because the kind of the point that was being made beforehand.
This is the whole point that was built on by actual Jake. This is what was being built on by President Sunday as well. So what I don't know what you're talking about.
But this is very different from like what Jenny and I were talking about is that like when I agree that you can have all sorts of identities and you can identify as a cat or whatever, like Mudkip or whatever. And like there's tons of identities that you can have. I identify as a Falcons fan and that's freaking insane, right? But that doesn't mean that I call Falcons fan being a gender, and that's the different thing, right? Is like identify as whatever you want, have these identities, but when you start calling these identities gender, that's where it starts to kind of muddy the waters.
I just think I'm hearing a lot of empty and frankly nonsensical arguments here. Like when we talk of gender affirming care, we talk of treating gender dysphoria, which can be a thing which trans men, trans women, as well as non-binary people can have. And when we talk about affirmation of identity, we don't really enter the space of medical healthcare. Those are two very different subjects. And affirming an identity of a person does not block the way for a person with gender dysphoria to get medical healthcare. That is nonsensical.
Yeah, I would agree with that position. So why are you saying that that the arguments are nonsensical? Where does that statement conflict with what's being stated by everyone right now?
Because what is being stated is that affirming non-binary identity or even xenogender identities will somehow block the access to that healthcare, and I just don't see it.
If you were to, if your goal is to try, it depends on what you're trying to do. In the case of Brianna Wu, which is sort of like the basis for this whole thing, if you're going to politicians lobbying and you're saying, hey, we need to fight for, right now we're trying to fight for the medical coverage for trans people to be able to go through gender affirming care. She's talking about the gender affirming care. She's talking about the medical transition, the HRT. She's talking about things like that she's trying to fight for. She's not going to a politician and saying, by the way, we need you guys also to write legislation so that you have to recognize neopronouns. That's not what she's doing, right?
I mean, it's fine that she's not doing it. I mean, different people advocate for different laws. These are two very different legal things, and for the most part, the healthcare that non-binary people and binary trans people need is relatively similar.
Yeah, so it seems like there's not really an issue. So what's the conflict
there
then?
is an issue. The conflict is that Brianna Wu, by her private discourse that has been leaked, is indicating that she is more than willing to cut off non-binary people as not really trans people.
Can you demonstrate that for me in her political advocacy?
Her immediate political advocacy does not even have to be relevant. What is relevant that...
So she says some things that are kind of disagreeable behind the scenes, but her political advocacy is in support of. So that's great.
With neopronouns again. With neopronouns.
It's the opposite of great.
So since she's impure in private, at least she's doing the right thing in public. Awesome.
For now.
Sounds great. I mean, it sounds like you should be praising it. It seems. Hold on. It seems like you should be praising that because it's like, holy shit, she could be advocating against us, but she's not. She's actually doing something that is supportive of the broader trans community. That's awesome.
No.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's great. That's awesome. You're basically saying that because she says it in private that she should somehow be condemned for all the pro-trans stuff that she's done in public that has not been anti-binary or against binary people. Okay, that's insane. That's like mental illness that you're advocating for there. That makes no sense whatsoever. You're talking about trying to sacrifice somebody who's actually fought for us broadly without singling out people based on their gender identity. You're actually wanting to sacrifice that because she has some personal disagreements with certain subsets in private. What is this madness? This is absolute madness. This is self-destructive to our advocacy. This is like, you know what? I don't think we should succeed in fighting for our own advocacy. I think we should self-destruct because our advocates, even though they're doing the right thing, in private, they're just not pure enough and perfect enough for me.
So I guess
the issue is not that Brianna Wu isn't a perfect advocate. We're not asking for perfect advocates.
That's what Lucy is asking. No, that is exactly what Lucy is asking for right now.
That is not what Lucy is asking for.
That is exactly what Lucy is asking for right now. That is exactly what she's asking for. She's saying in private, her views are slightly different and disagreeable. But she cannot point to her public advocacy and her political advocacy in being in line with those disagreements. So she's literally saying that she's not pure enough in private to be an advocate, and so we should sacrifice her. That is what she's saying.
Why should people not be allowed to discuss these things in private in a slightly disagreeable way?
Daedalus, you have been following this media.
Talk through these ideas.
Yeah, and why does
can we also point out
so much more? No, one sec. Why does this one thing that she did matter so much more than the good work she's actually done?
Right.
I think that you guys are ignoring something though, just real quick, because we're kind of. I feel like this is a little bit unfair because she is like the way that you talk about other people. It does affect other people socially, right? Like actually advocating for non-binary people, making them feel welcome in spaces. Talking about how they should be normalized more. So that is still political advocacy. That still does make changes to our social norms. You can't act like people having very like slurring non-binary people consistently isn't going to hurt them in any way, right? That is still some sense of advocacy.
There's a very specific group chat that had a very specific group of people, most of which agree entirely with that whole thing.
And they were all referring to somebody, to Doe, essentially, who was like
I was the one who started that.
They were all referring to a very specific type, right? Somebody who they thought or were under the impression that was like dear gender, right?
Naomi, you are. I want to confirm with you that Brianna Wu has publicly stated an intent to remove non-binary people from the movement to try to be more clear about goals, essentially.
No, she said she wanted to take the movement back. She said that she wanted. Yeah. Yes.
Since then also stated an apology.
True. So yeah, what Ninetales is saying, but she said initially she said that I want to take the movement back from this wing of the trans community, but as Ninetales stated, she did give an apology.
And they were talking about neo-pronouns, I thought, as well, again.
Yeah, I don't think it was non-binary. I think it was neo-pronouns, which again...
It was neo-pronouns.
Yeah, we
which is the movement...
No. This is the thing. Now, non-binary people are definitely, by and large, the biggest users of neopronouns, but it is some shit to say that neopronouns are tied strictly to gender identity. That's some bullshit. So neopronouns have existed for a very long time. There are neopronouns like Caesar that go back hundreds of years, like a couple hundred years.
And it seems like the majority of non-binary people don't use neopronouns as well, so it's just talking about neopronouns, not the majority of non-binary people.
I'm a binary trans person. I use any, all. I go by she, her, but I don't give a shit. So they're used all across the board. I know cis people using neopronouns, and it doesn't matter. It's don't try to say that it's strictly a gender thing. That's just ridiculous.
And what she didn't say is that they aren't a part of the LGBTIQ2S movement, right? She very much includes non-binaries in that and always has.
Yeah.
I don't think the existence of that makes me think, like, I don't think the pre-existence of neopronouns existing in some form of society makes me change my position on that. It's like you're telling me the history of something, but I also don't see how that validates the use of them today. Like, we're currently in a pretty different time where neopronouns
it doesn't her point is that they don't attach to non-binary people, not that they're more valid, but that they don't necessarily attach to non-binary people.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you strictly get to own the neopronouns. That's fucked up and stupid and retarded. I'm sorry, just plain stupid. The neopronouns are used by cis people, they're used by binary people, and they're used by non-binary people. I'm a binary person who uses neopronouns. There are plenty of cis people who use neopronouns. I call total fucking bullshit on this whole thing that you're going to try and say, oh, well, if you're not in support of fighting for neopronouns, then you're clearly not in support of non-binary people. That's some bullshit.
Can you provide me of an example of a cis person that uses neopronouns?
Yeah, we were just looking at them the other day. We were exploring a bunch of different people who were using them. Jenny, who's the person we were pulling up, and she was she it, and she was cisgender. Was it actual Jake's partner? I think it's actual Jake's partner.
I have no idea. I wasn't.
Actual Jake's partner is she it. She is cis.
And this is a cis person.
Why should this?
Doesn't this further trivialize?
Why should this
This is a stronger
the same
argument for
as
people who
me,
think it's
as
trivial.
a binary transsexual person with dysphoria who's medically transitioning? Why should this exist under one label?
Because having neopronouns and having non-binary people exist is not mutually exclusive with having medical care for trans people.
Okay. Maybe you don't speak English as a first language or something. Those two things existing aren't mutually exclusive. Why should they exist under one label?
How are they mutually exclusive?
I said they aren't. I said
they aren't mutually exclusive. The point is that it's not just a non-binary thing.
Like non-binary people are harming the trans community. If you can have
again, we're talking about neopronouns harming the trans community, not non-binary people right now.
You can have neopronouns and medical care for trans people and in legislation.
I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that.
Considered the same thing. Why is it all under this umbrella of transgender? Why?
Yeah, there are people who need medical care and there are people who do not need medical care. Does it not make sense to at least split those two categories?
That's not even what we're talking about. We're just saying that people who use neopronouns aren't necessarily excluded from getting any sort of medical care. We're just saying that neopronouns aren't.
Why do we have everybody under one label? When
but that's the point, is that neopronouns don't actually have much to do with gender, and so calling it a non-binary thing doesn't actually make sense because neopronouns aren't necessarily gender exclusive thing.
Hold on 1 second.
Yes.
I can't paste in the side chat, so I posted in the group chat. Cis person, this is actual Jake's partner. She, it are her pronouns.
Is it a neopronoun now?
Have you heard of?
I feel like that trivializes it way more than what we were currently discussing. I don't think that's a stronger argument against it. But
no, I think it's a very strong argument to say that pronoun that that neopronouns are not like solely owned by non-binary people, and therefore, if you don't support them, you don't support non-binary people.
Would you agree that there's a strong association with non-binary people?
I said that already. I qualified that it is probably more often used by non-binary people.
Okay,
but binary people,
about gender,
but when you but you have a binary person,
but
you have a binary person right here talking to you right now that uses them, and you have cis people that use them. So I'm sorry, I call bullshit on this whole thing that if you don't support
the fact that they're cis and like
Okay,
utilizing
so
neopronouns
I
in a way
have
that
a
it's equally as
question.
trivial if they're using it if they're trans.
Dude could be a
doesn't
neopronoun,
make
I
it
have a question I want to ask
it pushes
it
pushes back against the bullshit call that is tied mostly strictly to non-binary people, and therefore
it doesn't
not
matter
supporting
either
one doesn't
way.
support the other.
I have a
It doesn't matter
question for
either way because
everybody
the
in this
majority
chat.
just real quick to tie a bow on this. Just real quick, hold
I have
on.
a question for
Just
everybody
real
in
quick,
this chat.
just real quick. Let me just like close that out. The majority of non-binary people are not using neopronouns. So even when they're talking about excluding people with neopronouns, they are not talking about all non-binary people. Like President Sunday's trying to make it sound like it's a blanket statement for non-binary people, and it's just it would still be a minority of them.
Yeah.
I have a question for everybody in this chat. Do you think that a movement with more people in it is going to be able to provide more support for the people and more advocacy as a single unified group?
Can I answer first?
Coalition.
That already is the LGBTQ umbrella. We already have that with the LGBTQ umbrella. I don't understand why we can't split up people with different needs.
Well, it's already the progressive movement. It's already
further on that. I think a group with conflicting views, you might even say like contradicting views, should definitely take a look at the way it's like leading itself. So if there's like the idea that they should be like separate, which I believe, I don't think that non-binary people, like, I don't think we share the same experience. And I think that's like, and I think that a lot of people feel the same way. And if you were going to throw us all under one umbrella, then you can't act naive and think like we're all going to just jump on neopronouns, because it's just like the priorities are fucked.
Well, there's the problem that like gay and lesbian have always been the priority in the LGBTQ movement. And so most of the attention and effort and energy has gone toward them. And we've been passed over, as the T has been passed over substantially quite a bit until very recently. And so it's been something that's talked about is like, hey, why don't we kind of just do our own thing and advocate for ourselves, because we keep getting deprioritized, right? So there's definitely arguments for that. But overall, like coalition building is a good thing to do. Yes. I don't think that we want to like single people out or anything like that. I think what I hear people saying, particularly Brianna Wu was saying, is that this kind of stuff is just not really winning us the attention of legislators and politicians. But these other things that we have here, we have scientific grounding for, and we can argue for. And so we can present them with that, and that is actually getting traction. And we really need to prioritize and put energy into that.
Isn't that the argument during
Zonia, are
Stonewall,
you
the exact same one?
Is the science getting us anywhere?
Emmanuel,
I really don't think it is.
before you go there, I just have to pop out. Food Shops, thank you for having me. Everyone subscribe to Two Guys Talking History. Have a good evening.
Yeah, of course.
Wait,
Thank you so much for coming by. Farewell.
Good night.
So
is the science actually getting anywhere?
I want to respond to your previous question, the strength in numbers thing. That argument just falls on its face because it doesn't ask at what cost, okay? You're talking about diluting the entire meaning of this category of my experience and of basically discarding it and saying that, oh, well, if you just identify as a fucking frog or something, you get as much say in trans issues as anyone else. You can speak for us. You can
somebody identifying as a non-binary identity doesn't diminish the experience of binary trans people.
Look at
If anything, it
Well, hold on,
expands
hold
us.
on. Wait,
No,
Jenny wasn't
absolutely
finished.
does.
Hold on, Jenny wasn't finished. I want to hear what you were going to say with the
It
rest of that.
absolutely does. It conflates our experience with some. Even if I accept that it is a real thing, it's conflating what I go through as somebody who takes hormones, who's medically transitioning, who is trying to assimilate into the opposite sex as much as possible.
Isn't
Are you
experiences
non-binary?
dysphoria.
What?
And no, I'm not
If
non-binary.
you're not non-binary, then it doesn't. It's that simple.
What the fuck are you talking about?
That's
Isn't it an
as long as
argument
you're
that
calling both of them
How does it
trans, it
conflate both
does.
There's no
experiences?
conflation. They're saying they have different
There is,
experiences. That's
because
why
it's
they
putting
need a
it under
different
the
name for
umbrella
what
of
they go through.
transgender.
So
Okay.
you're expecting them to somehow describe what they go
here's an
through with the same
alternative
words we already use.
Okay, I'm going to provide an
What?
alternative perspective to this situation. So Brianna Wu doing this thing, I think, like, obviously it's the cause of this discord, but it's the cause of the conflict as well. Because if somebody heard, like, someone like myself would have heard Brianna Wu say that, and with not reading into it as much as some people on this panel would
I'm sorry.
have, I think that I would look at Brianna Wu and say, okay, maybe she's emboldening by the fact that, like, yes, the non-binary and the trans movement aren't really like as compatible as like some people like make it out to be. And so like seeing that statement, I think that if there was any trans women in her community who are like binary and focused on that particular thought, I think that she would have emboldened them at the same time. So I honestly don't think there's anything wrong with holding that opinion either. I believe it quite strongly,
I'm
actually.
sorry, this argument of we don't have the same experiences, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, that's an argument that I've heard often from transphobes, from TERFs, isn't it?
Who
I'm a
cares?
born
Sometimes
woman.
That
I'm a
well,
born
that doesn't
woman.
matter.
Why
That
should
doesn't
we?
matter.
Why should we be
Can I-
under
can
the
I
same
answer?
umbrella of
Okay,
women?
I don't think
Can I
that we
answer this
should.
question?
It
Can I answer
doesn't
this
I hate this whole.
question?
I hate this whole.
One at a time. One at
I
a
hate
time.
this
Let's be
whole.
civil. Let's be civil. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Transphobes
so-
also said we
okay.
should drink water.
Yeah, I know.
So I just look. We can acknowledge that there are meaningful differences between different groups without discriminating against those groups. So I may say that my experience as a cisgender woman is different from Jenny's experience, right? Or Zonia's experience, right? And they should be different. I should be able to acknowledge that. That does not mean that we're making anybody less, but we can acknowledge that these are two different experiences. And just like that, we can look at the experience of being a binary trans person and being a non-binary trans person and being somebody who goes by a neo pronoun. We can look at the differences there and acknowledge it without saying one is less than the other.
Yeah.
And yet they're all under the same umbrella, no?
They're under
That's
the
kind of what's being argued.
I think some people are fighting
Like
that
trans
perception
women
right
and
now.
women are under the umbrella of women, no? Even though they have different experiences.
If you choose to
It's a
acknowledge
movement,
that, then I
but,
guess
like,
on your side
we
of things
don't
it is true.
Or are you saying that's not true?
We don't
That
consider
trans
them a
women and
hive
women are
mind, if
not
that's what
under
you
the
mean.
same umbrella?
No, listen, we don't actually we don't think of them
No?
as like a hive mind or anything. I don't know what you're talking about. No.
Cis woman and trans woman are both under the umbrella of woman, but we don't conflate cis woman and trans woman as like the same
Right.
exact thing because they are different experiences. And so your argument makes sense that you're saying like, you know, well, we're calling them non-binary, so why would we conflate the two as the same thing?
Why would
I
we
think
not?
what they're saying is that the advocacy is as one group and as one movement, and so as one group and one movement, it's going to make people conflate these things.
Yeah, and the reason it makes more sense as well for trans women and cis women to be under one umbrella than it does for trans women and non-binary people to be under one umbrella, because we have a lot of the same real experiences. There is a lot of overlap there. You know, when trans women still experience sexism, you still get treated like women in most social situations. For a fully transitioned passing trans woman, the difference in experience between you and a cis woman is fairly small. I mean, it definitely exists, don't get me wrong, but it is way smaller than it is between me and a random non-transitioning non-binary person. And
You're
just
saying
to-
non-transitioning non-binary
You think
person.
you think
Do you think the
I guess-
non-binary
question.
people don't transition?
I think they don't medically transition.
But by
Well,
their
you
own
are
definition, they don't.
wrong about.
Is medical transition the only criteria that makes you trans, though?
Yes.
What separates
It is essential.
what
Yeah.
separates non-binary? What why exclude non-binary people from the trans umbrella? Because from my understanding, a transgender person is somebody whose gender is different from what is assigned at birth. So by that definition, somebody who is non-binary, who identifies with a non-binary identity, is trans. By that definition, their identity is different from what is assigned at birth.
I'm contesting the whole definition and its value as a category.
Lots of non-binary people medically transition. I'd say more medically transition than don't medically transition.
That's not true.
I don't know about that one.
I
To back
think
that up.
it's a
That is
dishonest
objectively not true.
characterization of what we have known transgender to be like throughout society, because all of a sudden it like doesn't mean that, and I feel like you're trying to gaslight us into like the contrary. It's just weird. I don't know.
So what I would say is that, okay, we can look at we've got people who believe their internal experience is incongruent with the gender that they have been assigned at birth, right? We have that as one definition of trans. But if somebody is non-binary, if they are outside the gender binary, then they are not identifying as another gender, right? They're identifying outside of the gender system. So it's not the same as trans.
It depends, because there are plenty of non-binary people who.
When people say.
Go ahead.
When people say that we don't belong under the same umbrella, like that is wrong. We are fighting against gender norms being shoved down people's throats.
You are fighting against gender norms. Speak for yourself.
It really depends.
And not all of us are
literally
gender
just trying
abolitionists
to
here.
survive.
It really depends on the trans person.
Okay, so go and survive under your own fucking umbrella. Don't include me in it.
People are fighting against the idea that their gender can be assigned to them within birth. Non-binary people are fighting against the idea that gender must be something you do in one category or the other. We are fighting against normativity one way or another.
That's fine.
I think most trans people are trying
you want
to
to tell me
fit
what
the
I'm fighting for,
normativity.
but I don't give a shit.
So
I think most trans people are trying to fit in with the normativity and not fight against it.
So you've got a lot of trans people who are trying to blend in with society, right? And so what they want to do is transition, and then that's it. They just blend in. That's their thing. That's who they are. So that's not really fighting. That is fighting what you might call like the assigning portion of gender normativity at the start of life, but they're trying to assimilate and blend in with society, in which case they're falling in with the norm.
Don't you see how our ends? Don't you see how
Jenny, I have a question for you.
Sure. Well, hold on. Let Ninetails finish.
I'm just trying to say that our ends reflect their goals in the way that when we try to say, hey, let's get rid of gender norms being shoved down people's throat, this benefits trans people, this benefits non-binary people, and it benefits people with neopronouns. It is
how does that improve? How does that improve my ability to access healthcare?
It makes it harder.
Because nobody's going to be able to. If we live in a society where gender norms aren't the default, and we actually listen to who people think they are, then no one's going to say, I think you're too masculine to apply for this therapy.
Okay, binary trans women would go for like a laser hair removal, okay? Most likely on their face, for the most part, okay? If there was a situation where a government was considering whether to cover that by like whatever form, if we were to go with your narrative, what we would be saying is that like it's okay if you have a fucking beard and you call yourself a woman. Like we're basically fucking ourselves by agreeing to that.
No, but we can do both.
And the justification for that surgery, the answer to that surgery is literally, well, it doesn't matter, right? You guys can look whatever way you want to look and still be called the gender.
How many trans women do you think honestly want to have a beard? How many trans women do you think? Let's be real now, Neve. How many
non-binary people identify as female?
Can you name
and still
one
have
example?
Facial hair.
Can you name one example of a? Because I'm guaranteeing like it would be at most one.
Well, if you're watching Libs of TikTok, it's like all of us.
It feels like it's not that uncommon. I don't know what your experience is,
I
but
think
again,
we can have a more spectral view of how gender works. This incorporates it And the more that we have this open-ended view of how gender should work, the less it oppresses people fighting
I
treatments like
don't
gender
care about
affirmation
views. I care
and
about
or
access.
who
I
don't
care
conform
about
at all.
access. I do not care about views at all. I care
You
about
care
the
about forcing
practical
people
application. I care
Well-
about the outcome. I don't care about anything else.
Wait, but
well, do you
Neve,
care
that's
about the
what she's
negative
I've
saying.
outcomes of
known
forcing
She's
people
hold on.
several.
Wait, hold on, because she's
I'm asking
saying
her a
that
question. Don't cut me off.
I understand, but
I'm
hold,
responding.
I'm trying to.
I'm responding.
I just.
Tom, don't let me respond.
I.
Tom,
Okay,
let
fine.
me
Go ahead.
respond.
You guys are going off
Do you, under,
what
do you
from what you
understand the
even said.
negative outcomes for forcing people to conform to gender roles?
I think that
Because
it might not be within someone's best interest, but throwing the whole fucking table away because you don't like the way something could turn out is worse than just going
nobody's
there and
throwing the
like
whole table.
participating
You're
in it in the
throwing the
first
whole
place.
table away.
Well, that's
You're
what
throwing
gender
the whole
abolition sounds like it
solidarity
is to
table
me.
away because you don't see the intersectionality of these groups.
I was never there. Like, to be honest, for me, it was never there. I've understood transgender to be what I know it to be. Can it be a little one-dimensional? Absolutely. But I think that that distinction is important in the way that it plays out in our access to like medical care.
Are you aware that there are binary trans people who they are binary and they may get problems with accessing healthcare because of the fact that they are perceived as being too masculine or too feminine? This is binary people, not
Okay, provide an example of how what I said would equal that. Like a practical example, like a real life one.
I know a relatively old trans woman who wanted to have short hair and wanted to and worked out a lot, and she still wanted to do a full medical transition, but she had a lot of trouble because of the fact that the doctor assumed that she was somehow not serious about it.
Okay, so some doctors have standards that are too high, therefore let's get rid of gender. Great argument, dude.
Well, we can actually hold on. Let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk
Did you
about
say
this.
that like
Hold on.
to
Wait,
want to
wait,
have like
wait,
muscular foods
wait,
like would be a little contradicting to that
One
someone
at a time,
in a
one at a
vulnerability
time,
like that.
one at a time. Thank you.
Here, let's talk about this for a second because this is interesting. So there used to be a lot of more aggressive gatekeeping here in the U.S. that required that you did live your life presenting as a whatever your target sex was in in living your life day to day that way. But when they did that, at least the guidelines at the time were not that you had to have like long hair or anything, but that you like, for instance, if you're male to female, that you would refer to yourself in the feminine, adopt a feminine name, and put on sort of a presentation roughly feminine, but like you would probably be shaving a beard and stuff like that, right? Getting laser, etc. And you would have to do that for present that way for a year or two before that they would put you on the track toward actual transition. A doctor having like an individual standard like that sounds like they wouldn't be following the guidelines, and like that would be wrong. But also most of that kind of gatekeeping has been stripped away from most Western countries that support transition and have gender affirming care, including ones that have rolled back certain recent affirm first models like Sweden. So even they are not going to be expecting you to be a long-haired feminine person if you prefer to have short hair because it's more practical or looks better.
Well,
So
what
I don't
I'm
know
saying,
what this is about.
What I am saying is I think that if we aren't trying to focus on a binary and just focus on giving people what they want and what will treat their dysphoria, then that is going to make it so that people like this woman are going to have a much easier access to healthcare.
That's what NB people think.
Well, that's what this binary trans woman thinks too.
Okay, but you're not like engaging with the other arguments about how all of this stuff that you're promoting might actually undermine healthcare. You're just giving a theoretical, whereas Zonia mentioned earlier like real examples of where these arguments are being used to prevent us from accessing healthcare.
I'm giving a real example of how it is that a focus on binary expectations is making it so that people are getting denied healthcare.
I would say that's either an anecdotal or a hypothetical. It's hard to know where this comes from because I've never heard a story like this before.
Yeah, you can't
Can we
actually
have a
prove the
concrete
cause and effect
example
there.
of non-binary people actually impeding healthcare?
Sonia, the thing you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, about that we've stripped away most of these things in Western gender affirming care, even in the countries that have like rolled back the affirm first model, like Sweden. So yeah, is that what you were asking me to reconfirm?
No.
No, it's about the like conservatives using the well, you can just identify as whatever gender you want to say, okay, well, therefore, then you don't need medical care to transition.
Oh yeah. We had that conversation. Brianna Wu and Mix Vivian and I had that conversation a while ago. Yeah, there's the whole idea. So I'm actually pretty cool with like sort of getting rid of gender expectations, and so overall pretty supportive of the idea that we can move in a direction where we have fewer and fewer bounds on gender. But yeah, we do have this, like, one of the big things that Brianna Wu and Vivian Wolf and I got into a bit of a fight with, not a fight, but a debate with Vivian Wolf over, is that if you effectively say that gender is just like this inexplicable thing, anybody can identify however they want, it actually downplays what people struggle with dysphoria, where they actually have a genuine, like a medically recorded and something that's scientifically studied issue that we're able to leverage in actual politics and lobbying in order to say this is something that we need to be able to get attention on, and we need to be able to provide medical treatment for. We need medical insurance in the U.S. to be able to support this. We need nationalized health in the U.K. to support this. And so when you go and you start saying, oh, well, actually, this thing is all just kind of fun and dandy and whatever, people can identify however they want, it's actually not that important, it downplays that. And that is something that is very easily weaponized against us. Is like, well, then why are we spending national coffers? Then hold on. Then why are we spending our national coffers on supporting transition when it's just kind of a thing where people like to identify as whatever? Or why are we putting money into support for this kind of thing, right? So that's the thing. We have science to prove and show this is something that we can leverage and get people to support, and you're trying to say, it's all fun and games. That's the
not
problem.
Just that,
that's
but polling has showed that like acceptance of trans issues has gone down over the last couple of years, while it was consistently rising for a long time. It seems like education on the differences between sex and gender and making trans people more accepted was steadily rising, and then the more gender abolitionist type arguments get into the mainstream, and then you got libs of TikTok playing a bunch of people saying pretty radical things. It makes it harder and harder for people to actually accept those sorts of things.
Can you provide your evidence for that?
Yeah. You're talking about the polling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd be particularly interested in whether
evidence. You can't access the side chat, so throw it in the group chat.
I have some evidence on that as well, which I'll
have
link
established
in the
during
chat.
this talk that a topic of identity and of gender dysphoria are not the same topic, right?
So could you say that again? I had to turn you up so I could hear you better.
We did acknowledge that the topic of gender dysphoria and identity are not the same thing. Just because someone can identify as like outside of the binary does not mean that gender dysphoria is a scientific.
The problem is that all of this activism is done under the monolith of transgender. It's treated as the same thing, even though there are these distinct differences. That's like the big problem. And also, like, another problem is like when it comes to having our own spaces. When it comes to having our own spaces, when I started transitioning about 6 years ago, I went to a number of trans groups to try and find people who were like me, who were going through the same things as me, so that I could have some community in my real life, some people I could relate to. And at most of those groups, they were overwhelmingly full of non-binary people who were not transitioning, who weren't on hormones, who weren't interested in being on hormones, and whose lives were entirely different to mine. And I've had to find spaces like this group chat with people like Brianna and Zonia and everyone else in there to talk about these things.
So now we are operating on turf logic, basically.
Well, and then
unironically,
what does that mean?
All right, Lucy, I'm gonna. Okay, so I'm gonna ask a favor.
Yes.
Don't try to immediately find a way to drop a maligning label onto something. Be a little more open-minded with the conversation and what's being said, because
it's not a label. It's a
It's a buzzword.
It's a buzzword. It's very easy to lean on because it doesn't, because then you don't have to actually build an argument to explain what it is that she is saying that's wrong. You don't have to engage with her.
If you let me speak, I will build the argument.
Well, then leave off of the label and then give an explanation why it is that you think that she's wrong.
I put the article in general.
The label contains the argument, and I can build up on that argument if you wish.
Well, why don't you engage with what she said?
I am engaging with what she said.
And by saying that she's using turf logic?
Yes.
That's not
and I can explain why.
Said.
Well, explain the logic.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's
well,
the
then,
turf
if
logic?
you will let me speak, then I will. That it's I cannot
what's the
speak
turf
if
logic,
once
Lucy?
I will not scream over you. I'll just not speak.
Well, we were asking, and then you said that your argument was, affirmed by that label. So.
Okay.
Yes, that's because just as you just said. So can I speak or?
Yeah.
Just as you just said, cis women who want to exclude trans women will say we need our own spaces. We have different experiences, and as much as you can find examples of shared experiences, bigots will, or rather, cis women who do not accept trans women will find differences, just as you find differences in experience between binary trans people and non-binary trans people. I can find similarities in the same vein.
I think we can accept that, though. You're saying you're like loading it like it's a horrible thing. I think like trans women, they understand how the world works and they can accept facts like that.
Also,
I think when it trickles into the rest of the community, that's where it gets a little weird.
Well, hold on.
There are spaces.
Jenny
do you understand my argument, or should I go more into
No, when
it?
you're saying that, like when you're saying that we're just weaponizing the tactics that cis women are doing to us.
Correct.
By creating the separation. And what
Correct.
I'm saying is I don't
I can
see them
see
as
through what she's
insults.
saying.
I see them as reality. And I live in a world with like personal responsibility and I operate
they
around
will say
that.
the
I'm
same
not trying
thing.
I'm not trying to throw the whole fucking baby out with the bathwater because it's inconvenient to me. That's what I'm saying.
And just because we're
I'm
acknowledging
saying you're
differences
just parroting
between
the same argument.
just because we're acknowledging differences between cis women and trans women's experience doesn't mean we're not accepting trans women. That it's not always a turf argument. Sometimes there is utility in acknowledging that there are differences in these experiences because there are things that trans women experience, like discrimination, that cis women don't experience, and there are things that cis women experience that trans women don't experience.
So the question becomes: are trans women and cis women under the single umbrella of
They're
women?
still under the umbrella of women.
Well,
Yes.
No,
are
no, hold on.
non-binary people and
you just waltzed past this whole thing. You basically said that Jenny was using a turf argument, which you didn't actually substantiate because you used the inverse of it. Jenny was saying that she went into a space that was predominantly non-binary people that was supposed to be a trans group. She felt like people didn't understand. Hold on. She said that she didn't feel like people understood her, so she had to go find another group where people better understood her that had people like myself and others. And guess what? In that group, not everybody there is strictly like binary and trans medical and all that. We actually had a couple of cis people in there. You have me who leans farther to the left on this issue. So she had to find a place that was more accepting of her, and she found that. It wasn't about her excluding them. It was about her not feeling understood and finding a group that would understand and be accepting of her. That's an acceptance, not an exclusion thing.
And cis women who do not approve of trans women will say the same thing. I did not feel welcome. I went to a place where that was
That's not it. I'm sorry. That is not it. That is
All right, one at a time, one at a time. Thank you.
Okay, I have.
Sorry.
One at a time.
Go ahead, Nine. I want to hear Ninetales.
So I have a question for Zonia.
Sure.
Did you just describe non-binary spaces as trans medicalists?
No.
I just want to. Okay.
No.
Okay, so I do hear what Lucy
She
Hayes
felt
is
like she was
saying, and I do want
misunderstood.
to say I hear what Lucy Hayes is saying, and it's that we hear this from TERFs. They say, "Oh, I go into this space. They respected trans women more than cis women, and I couldn't advocate for
Well,
my
no
own
one's.
problems without people shutting me down. They pushed me out."
No.
Yeah, but that
She's
also
saying that she
doesn't
So
was.
yes, we
She
have
didn't.
heard this
mean
from other
Well,
anything.
hold
That's
on.
the worst here. It's
Hold on.
ironic.
Let me clarify this. Do you think that there's a difference between feeling accepted and feeling like you're misunderstood or something,
based on
right?
what she said so far. I'm not surprised she didn't feel accepted, to be honest.
So she went into a space that seemed like they didn't understand the kinds of things that she was going through. She wanted to talk about those. She didn't really have a place. Well, I'm speaking a bit for Jenny here, but it seems like she didn't have really people to talk to that could understand her experience. So she went to a group that was both accepting of her and willing to hear out her experience, and some shared her experience as well. So I don't see how that is a TERF argument. TERF arguments are, oh, they're invading our spaces and we need to protect our spaces. That's totally different. That's the inverse of what she just stated.
No,
Even
that
if it
is the
was, can we
that is
talk
the
about whether or
exact
not it's
same
good or
argument,
bad?
actually.
It's
It
it's
was
the complete inverse.
Yeah.
Okay, it would be a TERF
I will
argument.
explain why.
A TERF argument would be if a non-binary person came into our space and they shut them out and said, "Oh no, non-binary people are invading our transmedicalist space here. You need to get out of here." She didn't do that. She just found a group of fellow people who deal with a similar experience, plus others, because we have non-binary people who were there, or people who lean more diversely on the spectrum.
Does it matter if it's a TERF argument? Can we talk about whether or not it's a good or a bad
It
argument
really doesn't matter
instead,
if it's a tough argument.
instead of whether or not we call it a TERF argument?
One
at a goddamn
Please.
time.
My hand is up. My hand is up.
All right.
So when we talk about how these spaces operate, a lot of these spaces are meant to be safe for non-binary people, such that their identity is not being questioned by people who want to have careless discourse at their own privilege. So maybe she felt pushed out
Their
because she
own
wanted to have a
privilege?
debate, and no
You
one
think
wanted to have
binary
that
trans
debate,
people are fucking
and no one wanted to
privileged?
have that debate there.
Far more than
So
non-binary
I think
people,
we're
I'd say that.
relatively privileged
That is a
relative to
joke.
non-binary
That is
people.
an
Yeah,
actual fucking joke
we
if
are
you believe that.
relatively
So-
privileged.
See, this is
compared to
exactly
non-binary
why there needs to be
This
these
sounds-
distinctions
You're not-
between
this
the
sounds-
binary
I have a
women-
question
Oh my
for
God.
you.
I would
let
say-
me explore this. Let me
Okay,
insulting,
nine
honestly.
tails.
Zonia, I have a
Tails.
question
I
for
want to
you.
explore this. I want to explore
Well-
this. Do you think cis women are relatively privileged compared to us? Yes or no? Do you think
Cis
cis women are relatively privileged
And
compared to
now
us?
we're doing oppression
No,
Olympics,
to
guys.
non-binary
This is
people?
gonna,
Yeah.
my head's gonna explode.
Dude, I'm not doing this fucking oppression Olympics bullshit.
Yeah.
Zonia?
Wow.
This is starting, and this is by the way,
Why is that so
and by the way,
hard?
hold on.
I agree.
For muting people.
You're really bad at
Ninetales.
you're really bad at
Right.
recognizing oppression. I agree.
Okay, so Ninetales, what you're saying is
Sonia.
starting to sound a little
Sonia.
bit like a TERF argument, because you're sitting there and trying to split those hairs and try to divide people based on that stuff and say, well, maybe you're too privileged for this environment.
No,
No,
I
I'm
don't-
saying we're all part of the same movement. If anything,
I mean,
don't
that's
think
an
that,
argument of exclusion.
I don't think that we should be trying to talk about people's relative privilege that much either. But Zonia, I have a question for you. Do you think you're in 2014? You're in Ukraine. Do you think that the way to save Ukraine is to give Crimea to Russia?
What the fuck?
I mean,
Why?
that's basically
Why?
what you're advocating.
What the fuck is this?
No, Zonia, answer. Yes or no?
answer.
Just
Right, I
answer the
gotta
question,
go.
please, so we can move.
Can I say bye?
I think the answer was to nuke Ukraine and
Hold on, let's
Russia
start us.
simultaneously.
Shut
Hold
up,
on,
real
can we
quick.
have Stardust have
Genocide,
her
kill them all,
final
let's go.
closing statements first? Final closing statements from Stardust. Yes, Stardust, go. President Sunday, I no longer believe is a real person. I now believe that President Sunday is actually like a giant wet towel in a cardigan that somebody put in front of a camera. Secondly,
Also, it's Thursday.
It is Thursday. And yeah, I don't know how anybody watches that, but I'm amazed. It's amazing. And then secondly, I understand the points that people are making on this panel, and I just want to say, like, you know, we need to kind of think about what is the best way to make sure that people's needs are taken care of. When we've got like conflicting interests, when some people are, you know, saying that they don't have dysphoria and they don't need it and they don't need any type of medical treatment, how are you going to justify
how is that
that
at all
this
a
other
conflicting
group?
interest?
All right, stop.
Closing statements.
Closing
He's heading
statements,
out.
please. No responses. Thank you.
So, you know, if you've got one group that is is basically saying that we don't need medical treatment, and another one that's saying we do need medical treatment, that can be conflicting. Yes. So you kind of have to, I would just encourage people, think about why is it wrong for us to acknowledge differences between different groups when they have different needs, right? So that's all I'm saying. Thank you for having me. I'm Stardust. You can find all my links at stardust.rip. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Good riddance.
I just want to point out Stardust can't handle what the other argument is because that's entirely wrong. Nobody's saying we can't acknowledge differences, just that we come together under a common struggle. Trans people have rights, non-binary people have rights. The fight for those rights in a society which does not recognize them is the common struggle.
Why should we
No, it
trauma
doesn't.
bond instead of focus on the differences and align
Are
our
we in,
priorities as such?
are we in closing
Trauma bond?
statements?
That's
Isn't
just
this
fucking rhetoric?
are we in
Well, you just
closing
said
statements?
Wow, way to
you
turn
said that
into
we
a
all had
rhetoric
like
term.
shared experiences as different communities. Like, why is the strength in our community our ability to trauma bond when we could literally just focus on the shit that we want in our specific groups and then prioritize around
That's
that?
the only way to think about
I
it.
I like that
Zonia
argument.
issue on your part.
Zonia,
Work on your
Zonia,
creativity skills, and maybe it won't be trauma bonding.
Neva, I like
Look,
that.
just think
Neva, I
outside
like
the
that
box if
statement.
that's all you can think
That
about
was
it
like,
at.
I think that was a solid statement, rock solid statement from Neve.
All right, let
Zonia,
Emmanuel get in.
you never answered my question. Yes. Do you think that the right thing to do to save Ukraine is to give up Crimea in 2014?
I don't understand why we're so far off topic and don't really give a shit. So
we are pretty.
Zonia, I know.
Here, is anybody here on Twitch?
No.
Oh, brother.
Because like, what kind of faggot would ask a question
I
like
know.
this?
Jesus.
I know.
Lucy,
but
you
nobody's
probably
watching, you can say whatever
understand,
the fuck
and
you
Naomi understands. So I think it's pretty clear. A sizable portion of us do understand why we're asking.
This doesn't nuke my YouTube pod, does it?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
The reason is
my.
simple. Because
God, I hope you guys you should have answered.
I raised my hand, but I genuinely don't give a shit. You're good.
You got to disavow. Loud disavow. Shout me down. Say I'm an evil person. Say I'm disgusting.
Base Zonia, use F slur more on my Twitch. Thank you.
Okay, wait, Kenko, you asked me to bring you on, but you haven't said a single fucking thing this entire
I haven't had
channel.
much of an opinion
Are you
on some
just
of
getting
this stuff.
screen time for clout? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, actually, yes, I am.
Well done.
Okay, great, fantastic. All right, is there anybody else on here who's just getting screen time for clout? Okay, wonderful. All right, make your arguments. Thank you.
Who's next on closing statements?
I don't think we're all doing closing statements.
No,
we're
there's
still
no closing
arguing. It was
statements, there's no
just
end
Star
time,
that was
okay?
leaving.
All right.
We're stuck in hell for eternity.
God
we all better get
damn.
comfy with each other because we're all going to suffer through this together, aren't we?
All right.
Yeah, a lot of this does, like, it separates along ideological disagreements on gender abolition, and it seems like there is a large majority that align pretty much with the current cultural norms that we have in the West. And then there's the small minority that wants to kind of like change a lot of that. And the majority feels like they're getting screwed over by representing that smaller minority at the same time because they don't actually align with their ideology and their beliefs. And so it kind of makes them, it's like conservatives having neo-Nazis on their same side and then feeling like, okay, we kind of want to like separate ourselves from these people who are overly conservative. It's a little bit too extreme for most people with gender abolition.
Well, part of the difficulty as like progressives, you know, we have a lot of difficulty coalition building and aligning on things because we always want change. We always want things to go forward. We always want new things. It's like, okay, we haven't gone far enough. And so there's always going to be moving in new directions, moving forward, trying to break boundaries. Gender boundaries kind of become more uncomfortable. We find more and more correlation with a lot of anxiety that people struggle with having to do with rigid gender roles and such. So we're trying to break those. Then people are like, well, why do we even if we're breaking the gender roles, why do we even have the gender boundaries in the first place? And so it's very hard to find a way to say, hey, how about we narrow down on these things and fight for these things and coalition behind them and get the momentum behind it, when you got a bunch of people who are like, well, that's not far enough. And I don't know how to do that, honestly. I feel like political pragmatism kind of works a little bit against modern fast-paced progressivism.
Wait, I know, and this is me, and I'm mainly going to like ask on something that Tom said, but how are non-binary people comparable to neo-Nazis in this? How are those two examples comparable?
Oh, you're in it
the
now,
more
Tom.
extreme faction of the movement. As I show, like I did post 2 links that are showing that acceptance of trans medical necessities are going down in polling. I posted the Washington Post and the Pew Research Center. It seems like they're...
One is advocating for the entire exclusion of an ethnic group, and the other is just people who use people who use like...
I didn't say, but that's not what I compared.
Yeah, there is actually some comparison as well between the tactics these people will use. Like, I mean, just from the last 48 hours alone, I've had so many death threats and people telling me to kill myself. Like,
yeah, we're talking about the extreme. Yes, we're talking about the extreme factions of the movement. Not that you're advocating for like genocide or anything like that, but that you are attached to a movement while having very different beliefs, very different ideologies attached to it, where the rest of the movement doesn't feel like they're going to want to represent those beliefs anymore.
So, like the LGBT during Stonewall. Yes.
I suppose I feel like this is just another, like, you know, Hitler drinks water, so we should all stop drinking water argument. But
I mean,
maybe
it's identical. Trans people were the extreme faction that the broader movement just didn't want to support because they had different beliefs. They were just too much.
Yeah, sure. There are going to be people who have different beliefs, and some are going to be more extreme than others, to where they don't feel like it's going to be beneficial
was not started
anymore.
by a trans woman. That's a lie.
Nobody's saying that, though.
I just heard someone say it. So.
And it is.
You know what? I'm changing the narrative. I'm changing the narrative. From this time forward, a tranny started Stonewall. All right, we started the Stonewall right. New narrative. We own it. No more of this bullshit about
it. Wow, you're so edgy, Zone. Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
I obsess over the words that people say. Oh my god. Oh my god, I'm such a whiny little tranny. I get freaked out about everything. I'm so true. Oh my gosh, I'm so true-tastic that I get faint of heart when people say slurs. I'm such a sensitive little pseudo-intellectual troon.
I will
You're doing violence right now. May I finish, please?
All right, what's the next point?
You non-edgy person, you.
Ninetales is trying to.
All right, what's the next
point? So
point?
in response to Tom, I think that there's more overlap than difference, especially as I point out there's a common struggle for rights, and that common struggle for rights is from a system that by default does not recognize them. And you can assume trans people have all their rights nowadays. That is definitely not true. If anything, there's people willing to lose the trans athlete debate because of they don't want to lose debates personally, and they're just not willing to do research, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, like we are up against the same common threat of a system which by default does not recognize our rights. So you can keep saying that it's so different and they need to be separate categories, but it's only separate in certain ways. And that, like,
but it's some of the most important ways.
People are seeking surgery, and the fact that non-binary people aren't seeking surgery means that they're not detracting from the surgery that trans people want, by definition. And even when they do, it's because they're trans non-binary
overwhelming
people.
majority of non-binary people do not do that.
Also, hello, Rose.
Okay, great. Good for them. That's their choice. Binary rights, or non-binary rights, I mean.
But that totally like detracts from what you just said, though, no?
Yeah.
Like, nobody's saying it's not their right, but it's like, it means that there are very different goals
The fact
here.
that they don't get surgery mean that they can't step on the right for access for trans people. They're not even trying to seek the same thing that we're getting, so they can't delegitimize that.
They delegitimize us by appropriating our whole identity and using it as a legitimate front for their own thing.
By what means?
Do you delegitimize cis women? Do you delegitimize cis women? No. So it is possible to think about this differently than just these other
Completely
people
different.
exist.
I'm trying to become as close to a cis woman as possible. That's the whole point of transitioning.
How is it? No, it is irrelevant.
It is the perf rhetoric.
So it's the same rhetoric, but that doesn't mean anything. This is the Hitler had a dog argument. You guys keep doing this, where you say, "Well, you're making arguments that TERFs would make, or something like that." Where it doesn't matter that TERFs would make that argument. It literally doesn't.
It's so that they don't have to engage with the actual argument. It's so that they don't have to engage with the argument. It's just like it's a Nazi technique, basically, that they don't have to engage with the argument. Yeah.
Well, they are the same arguments. Or do you deny they are the same arguments?
No, you're using the Nazi technique of not engaging with the argument.
The point is that if we said, the point is that if we said Hitler says that everybody should drink water, it doesn't mean that we're all going to stop drinking water now. You saying that TERFs make similar arguments doesn't mean that they're wrong.
What are the arguments that are similar?
The point
Who cares? Who cares if they're similar? Why do you care?
Is the point.
Why do you care? Why do you care if they're similar? Why do you care?
Because there are certain arguments that Hitler made that are bad. Do we agree on that?
Yes,
not
but
every
why do you
Hitler
care?
opinion is benign
why do you,
as Hitler drinking water. Do
why
we
do you
agree?
But in this case, we don't agree on what the TERFs say are bad, and so you just saying TERFs said it doesn't mean that we're going to think it's bad.
You have to substantiate it somehow.
Well, you're the one who claimed.
No, you just calling it a TERF argument. Yes, you just calling it a TERF argument is you saying that it's bad without actually saying that it's bad. And so we're saying you have to actually explain why it's bad.
You're making a tautological argument here. You need to actually go and build on this and say, hey, this is why it's a TERF argument. This is why it's bad.
Why is it bad for cis women to say that trans women are stealing their spaces? Why is it bad?
Why is it? Say that again.
Why is it bad for cis women to say that trans women are stealing their spaces? And that the experience is totally different.
Well, because we're not stealing their spaces.
Oh, it's more about it being wrong than bad.
What is?
I will say the same. Non-binary people are just not stealing binary trans people's spaces.
What makes it wrong, Tom?
The same. My answer is the same. They're just not doing it. They're not stealing the spaces. What now?
Wait, but you can't say that non-binary people aren't representative of the trans movement, and that their their gender abolitionist movement isn't like somehow now being attached to all trans advocacy.
We're gonna lump non-binary people of gender abolishment movement?
It's not just non-binary people, it's gender abolition in general. I would say the non-binary people especially, but like yes, gender abolition all over.
Like non-binary and gender abolition go together like peanut butter and jelly. And I think that binary,
not necessarily,
trans women and medical transition go together as well. It's simple.
By calling themselves non-binary.
You just told me that I'm saying things just because they are, but you just did it yourself.
Okay, so is there
somebody who doesn't? Okay, let me answer. So somebody who can't medically transition but otherwise would isn't less of a trans person.
Yeah, so
if it's not accessible to them, The inaccessibility doesn't invalidate
Should
them.
we?
So
Okay. Should we
therefore, we
stop
don't
building?
need
Should we
people to
stop
medically
building?
transition to be
Hold on,
trans.
let her
Okay.
finish. Hold on. Finish what you said there because I couldn't hear what you said.
Should we stop building stairs? Should we stop building stairs because people can't walk?
But nobody's arguing this, Neve.
Nobody's
What are
saying
you
that.
on about?
Nobody's arguing.
Okay, so
Well,
I think
it's
the
analogous to what you were
problem
saying.
I think the problem that we're running into here is trying to understand what is actually being said. I feel like everybody's assuming what everybody else is saying, and then some are trying to tie that to like, you know, evil words and shit like turf. So
words.
maybe if people could kind of like more clearly state their position. So Jenny, why don't you like give your take
We're
again?
being very clear in our
Okay, so
position.
I did want
just
to answer
just to
as to why it's
clarify,
wrong.
just
People
to
ask.
clarify the point about why sometimes exclusion is good. Okay, when it comes to non-binary people and transsexual people, the vast majority of these types of people have very different experiences, and this is a space that should specifically acknowledge those differences. When you start talking about women's spaces generally, you're talking about like places that have like that they don't just exist to validate women's identities. You know, they exist for practical reasons, right? So you need women's bathrooms to give them privacy from men. Okay, that's a need that trans women have as well as cis women, and it makes sense to categorize them the same way when you're thinking about bathrooms. So most of the time, that is generally true. Like it's good to include trans women in that because trans women and cis women have a large overlap in experience. But when it comes to non-binary people and trans,
Let her finish. Let her finish. Let her finish.
but when it comes to non-binary people and transsexuals, there is far less overlap. And practically, the way that that plays out is that most of the people under the umbrella of transgender have a fundamentally different experience to transsexuals. So having these people all exist in one space harms transsexuals because we don't have a community of our own to advocate for ourselves, to talk about our experiences, and to just exist among one another. That's it. That's the problem. And that's the difference
Yes,
between
but
those
again,
two cases.
that's-
The existence of exclusive categories is not an inherently bad thing.
Whether you like it or not, a cis woman who excludes trans women will say the exact same thing. We were born
That's
women. We
fine.
have
That's
periods.
their prerogative to
we
do
have,
so.
Okay, so
That's their
we
prerogative
need our
to
own
do
spaces.
So let me talk
Okay,
about.
and you know what? If they can construct an
acknowledge
argument
a
for
different-
why trans women should be excluded from a specific case and it's strong enough, then I would agree with it. I don't need to go to a gynecologist, okay? That's never going to be a need for me. That's going to be like if I tried to go there, what would be the point of including trans women in that? It doesn't make any sense. That is a case where it makes sense to acknowledge the difference between trans women and cis women. But when you're talking about something like bathrooms or, I don't know, like a crisis center for people who've been sexually assaulted, it starts to make a bit less sense.
So I have a question for Lucy. I want an answer. Like, it's a serious question. Is it that you're kind of like afraid of having arguments that might possibly validate turf arguments, like genuine turf arguments? Is that the problem? That you're afraid that it comes a little too, that if you say that, yes, it's okay to do this, the problem is it's coming a little too close to also saying yes to some turf arguments. Is that
I'm
the
not
problem?
afraid that they might. They do. They absolutely do.
So because Jenny has made really good cases for why there are needs to exclude based on
has not.
difference experiences. She just did. She literally just did.
No,
she
she
said
just
it
said the
didn't.
differences are there are different experiences. It's
Well,
as
no,
shallow as
no.
empty as when
No.
the transphobe
She
say it.
literally just said it doesn't make sense for a trans woman to go see a gynecologist, right?
It doesn't mean that trans
So-
women are not women.
So it doesn't matter. That's not what she's saying. She's saying that
Does
there's an
matter
exclusion
because
there.
she is saying
But
that
you're
non-binary
saying
people are not trans.
So what she's saying that there is a difference of experience and there isn't as much overlap, whereas there's a lot of with binary trans women, there's a lot of need for things that non-binary trans people do not need and do not fight for. And so what she's talking about is prioritizing the support and fight for what binary trans people need. That's not her saying that you guys all need to go jump off a cliff or something. That's her saying that we need the ability to prioritize and optimize and fight for the things that we need as binary trans people. And when we try and lump a whole bunch of other people who don't need those things under that umbrella and try and fight for all at once and spread ourselves thin, we have a lot less power to accomplish what we need to do there, because we're spread thin and divided and everybody wants to go in every direction.
Basically, yes.
That is incorrect. What
Why?
she's speaking of is not. What was the term that you used? What she is advocating for?
The term that I used?
Yes.
Well, the term that I used is that there are reasons to exclude.
Exactly. Exclusion is the thing that's being.
So is exclusion?
Yes, that's what I'm advocating for exclusion, for gatekeeping. I am a trans medicalist.
Hold on.
Jesus Christ.
Hold on.
So it's not for prioritizing, it's for exclusion.
Lucy.
Wait, that's the same thing.
That's the whole point.
No,
you exclude
prioritizing does not mean exclusion. That's nonsense.
It
not
often
necessarily,
does mean,
but they're not necessarily separate.
So is there a problem with using the word exclusion? What if she said prioritize? Would you be okay with that, even though it meant excluding people when it came to prioritizing one over the other?
Exclusion. No.
So what if we prioritize binary trans people's needs, but that means that we are prioritized to the exclusion of non-binary's needs?
Then that is unacceptable to me.
Well, so then that's a really good argument for having a division between the two, so that you can prioritize one's focus and the other can prioritize the other's focus.
Division is exclusion.
So what you would rather have, what you'd rather have is dilution and moving in all directions and less effectiveness, and so less ability to advocate and fight for and succeed in achieving everybody's goals.
But you still haven't been able to.
This is because she doesn't understand what solidarity is. It's not dilution, it's solidarity.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
It's literally dilution. You're expanding the definition of the term.
Yeah, Ninetails, you and I fought. You thought that coalition building was a bullshit thing. You don't care about solidarity, so fuck off with this shit.
When you continue to draw, continue to draw parallels between cis women. Okay. I'm sorry, I forget your name right now. Oh, Lucy. So when you continue to draw parallels between cis women and trans women, what you're telling me is that you don't understand the actual underpinnings of what makes it okay for us to be trans women in public. It's not that we think that women should be trans women. It's that we are capable of picking our own battles and making the distinction when it counts. There's a really big difference
again,
there.
We're going back to the Stonewall argument.
No, we're going back to the argument of picking your own battles, aligning with people who share the same priorities, and being like actually smart about the way we like spread our resources. And if there are people who align in a different way, all power to them. I'm not saying they're invalid, but on their own ship, on their own time. That's what I'm saying.
Hold on. Are you saying that non-binary people, just because they do not need surgeries themselves, for example, do not have the resources, time, or anything to advocate for those who do need surgery?
What I'm saying is that because you continue to draw parallels between trans women and cis women, I'm saying that that does not invalidate the concerns that we have for trans medical goals and ideas, because they are primarily based on our experience and the things that we see, not your conception of gender and like your word for naming every nuanced experience that you exhibit in your personality.
And you recall the first thing that I brought up when I first came in here, one of the early things I said, I talked about historically, one of the problems that we've had for LGBTQ advocacy is that the T is always deprioritized and like the last one considered for the longest time. And it was always the L and the G that got all the attention, got all the focus and everything. So yeah, and one of the things that was talked about and which is something that we talked about fighting for a lot for a long time, is maybe the T needs to prioritize itself and fight for itself. And that's why we had the whole trans rights movement, right? So move in that direction. Now we're playing with another big canvas again. We've got a lot of people who have a lot of different needs, and there are clearly defined categories, some of which trans medicalists or transsexuals have very specific needs that trans binary do not, or non-binary do not tend to have overlap with, or very rarely do. If they do have overlap with it, they can still work within what it is that's provided, that's fought for by trans medicalists. But there's a reason to draw that distinction and understand that and have a prioritized fight for these things, especially since these are things that we can scientifically argue for and actually present to politicians in a way that is convincing, that better wins these kinds of things over.
You know, I do appreciate that you guys immediately jump to the solidarity argument and saying that, oh, well, you know, we're all stronger together, right? Because at least you admit, you're kind of upfront about the fact that the doing this to us is a purely political thing. Okay, so I appreciate the honesty there.
Well, no, it's
fuck
not
you.
purely
Well,
political.
the funny thing is that...
No, don't say, whoa, I'm responding. We can identify the common ways that they are oppressed. It's literally based on how they're made visible by society. And you, Zonia, and you, Jenny Matrix, have been a perfect example of that, because you've shown that trans rights should end at trans rights, and that's it. And as soon as you start trying to apply that to non-binary people, you're out of fucking line.
The NB argument and prerogative is parasocial. It's parasocial and it's convenient. That's all I'm like. That's literally it. It literally.
It's parasocial. Do you listen to the words you use?
Absolutely parasocial.
So
you don't know what you're talking about.
So
describe how it's parasocial.
When you say that we're stronger together, when an MB person says that to me, I believe them, because their whole like idea of their sense of self is underpinned by our reality that is based in like actual medical science. Like if we don't exist, then you guys don't exist.
I don't think parasocial.
What happens when the medical
I don't think parasocial is the right word, but yeah.
Science isn't caught up.
I agree.
Then you fight for rights. And then
parasitic.
It's more than just medical science.
Here's a better word. Parasitic. There we go.
It's more than just medical science.
How is it parasitic?
It's more than just medical science. It's about rights.
It's parasitic because the more that we capitulate to non-binary people, the farther away we get from trans, like gender affirming care and the priorities that we have as non-binary or binary trans women.
Since it's like 8 a.m., I might have to go soon. So do I have like a closing thing or?
Yes.
All right. So I guess in closing, I think that exclusion of groups has historically never actually worked to achieve anything. I think that it's actually a thing that dilutes groups into small, weak fractions that are very easy to pick out by, let's just say, conservatives. And I think that it's the worst thing to do. Try to exclude a group just because you see a benefit in it for yourself. That's basically my closing statement. And
Gosh, I wish the purity testing people would figure that one out.
Wait,
Wow.
Zonia, stop. Okay.
I mean, saying that non-binary people are not good enough is an ironically a form of purity testing. They're not.
I don't know who said that they aren't good enough. I think we were saying they were pretty damn good.
You said that they're not.
You ironically used the word. You ironically used the word dilute in the way that you were describing the relationship between the non-binary and binary trans women. So that's kind of weird, but.
Well, fare thee well. Bye bye.
Farewell.
Yeah.
Farewell.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I have a question. Okay,
I see lots of intact book bindings there, by the way.
To me or
well, you got work to do.
Jesus, Jesus Christ. Okay, all right. Good night. Good night.
Bye bye.
Farewell.
Goodbye. Thank you. I have a question. Okay,
you gotta set times for this food shop. We can't be in the 10th circle of hell arguing about this for eternity. All right.
Well, listen. If you need to go to sleep, you simply just leave.
Oh yeah, I gotta go.
Otherwise,
Yeah,
I will go on until around 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Yeah, or if you feel like we're looping, then you can just call out the loop, right? I mean, no one's stopping you from saying like, "Hey, we're looping on this for a 10th time."
I gotta get some rest, all right?
Okay.
All right.
Well,
All right.
If that is all, thank you.
Bye.
All right. Farewell.
Okay, I have a question.
What is your question?
Yeah, I'm relatively new to the conversation. I've only been here for like a few minutes, so I've just been listening. I'm not exactly. I kind of know where the battle lines are, but not really. But I just have a question. Like, what area of advocacy do we say like what particular areas of advocacy do we say it makes sense to advocate for binary trans people in this space, but not for non-binary trans people, like in particular? either for political effectiveness or to make the differentiation between the two? Like what? Because in my mind, if we're advocating for the rights of trans people, I think you're like necessarily advocating for the rights of non-binary people in most cases. Like in what case would you be doing one and not the other? I'm just having trouble imagining a scenario.
I mean, just promoting the idea of gender identity and self-identification and insisting that like all of these, you know, like whenever you go and fill out a form now, there's like 50,000 different gender options to choose from. Kind of just promoting this idea that trans doesn't mean transitioning when, I mean, it does and it should. And it originally did until these people, these parasites, I will call them parasites because that's what they are. That is what the relationship between them and us is.
And you literally talk like a turf.
I don't care. I don't give a fuck what you think about how I talk.
I don't know why people care
slimy
about
scumbag.
Why do you guys
think
keep
what you
doing
want
this?
about me.
I don't know
It
what
doesn't fucking
dude.
matter.
I
Just
don't
shut up.
understand this
That would
whole
require
like.
introspection, wouldn't it?
I don't
You're
understand
afraid of your own
this
reflection.
whole. I
Oh my
just
God.
don't understand this whole like. You don't want to look like these people. You don't want to look like this. Oh my God! I gotta gate everything I say
Ignore it,
because I
dude.
don't want to
No,
look
it's not
like
that she
somebody.
doesn't want to
Like
look
what the
them.
fuck is this?
That she can
This
only
pussy shit.
operate from.
No, come on. This is
She
pussy
clearly
shit.
can
This is
only
Don't even
pussy
operate
engage
from
with
shit.
it. It's so
This is
stupid. It's
pussy
derailing.
shit.
It's
Okay.
derails. It's
She
just
clearly
stupid.
can
Leaning
only
on
operate
all
from the
these
logic of
labels,
thinking
like
less of other people.
leaning on
No,
all
originally
these
No, this is just
said
labels.
prejudice. This is just
Is
this
let's
is
be
the same
clear.
prejudice that turf had.
Ninetales,
It's
let's be clear.
fallacious,
I was the
though.
one who introduced that idea. She just agrees with that.
Okay.
So that's like maybe it's not as
Okay.
outrageous as you think it is.
So you sound like a turf
Is
sometimes too.
by the way, Ninetales, this is like a
And
pretty.
Zonia sounds like a turf sometimes too.
Do I sound like this sometimes?
I've said this before.
But again, the argument that they sound like turfs is
I get it.
fallacious.
Everybody
We
sounds
already
like a
went
turf.
over it earlier
Because
that it's not.
everybody's
It
got to
doesn't
police
actually say
everyone's language.
anything.
They don't sound like a turf.
Based in turf build.
Wait, hold
so-
on. Rose has been quiet this entire time. Rose, do you have anything to?
I don't know. I've mostly been listening just because like I wasn't watching before I joined, so I wanted to get an idea of what was being talked about.
Okay.
I don't know. One question I have is like, I don't know, for the people that are for this sort of separation, do you think like the political negative outcomes that have been happening for trans people in the past like few years would have been lessened if like in the time before that we had pursued like your idea of sort of like separating the advocacy? Or do you think like it doesn't have an effect on like legislative stuff?
I absolutely think that the modern conception of transgender and the activists who promote it have done irreparable damage to our image and to public acceptance of us. And this is partly why I'm so passionate about this. It's because I actually hate you people because of what you've done. I hold you entirely
Wait, why are you
responsible
saying that to
for the
me?
huge. No, I'm not. No, sorry, I'm speaking generally. I'm not saying to you
Because she
specifically.
just talks like J.K. Rowling.
Like I'm
Oh
literally
yeah,
talk
J.K.
like
Rowling.
J.K.
I support the rights of
Like,
under 18s to
like, that's literally
transition.
all
Okay,
about her.
don't tell me I'm J.K. Rowling. Also, again, with this telling me
you
who
really
I
are.
sound
You
like,
really
I don't
are.
fucking care.
No,
It doesn't
just ignore
matter
it.
to
Just
me.
ignore it. Just ignore it. Just ignore it. Just
Well,
ignore
you're
it.
better than her. You're
Jesus
morally more
Christ.
better than her.
Just ignore it.
So,
Because,
Ninetales, you're the bleeding edge, right? You acknowledge that, right?
what does that mean?
That you're trying to
Is this like
push.
some sort of southerner term?
No. It's that you're like you're way off into the far future, and you want to accelerate things in that
By
direction.
advocating for trans rights being and
But-
non-binary rights?
But
Really?
but Jenny and Neve, they tend to be more the norm, right? Which is what's pretty common. Transmedicalism is the norm.
No.
It started to.
Actually,
starting
most
to
of the trans
change.
people I know are against trans.
Yeah, because you live in a
medicalism.
you live in a bubble. I get it. That's fine.
So just because we're on a panel,
but
just because we're on a panel,
no,
doesn't
I'm
mean
talking.
I'm the one who lives
No,
in a
I'm just
bubble.
no,
You're
I'm
the ones
talking
who
about the
talk about feeling
norm.
pushed out.
I'm
because
not
there's
using
too many non-binary
Look,
people
I'm not
in a fucking
using.
space.
I'm not using
No,
anecdote
listen,
here.
listen,
I'm not using
listen,
anecdote
listen.
here. You're
Look,
a
I'm cutting
terminally
you off.
online, pseudo-intellectual,
I'm cutting you off.
pseudo-academic faggot.
I'm about
So
to make
hold on
points.
a second.
I'm about to make points. I'm about to make points.
Now, you live in a bubble,
about to make
but
points.
she is the norm.
I'm about to make
She's
points.
got sort of a
The real
norm
bubble
position.
is not being able to think of.
Okay. All right. I mean, both of you guys, can you guys calm down just a little bit? Is that okay? All right, cool, awesome.
Wait, before unmuting them, you have to tell them who's going to speak first. Who's
you gotta.
Just
not the norm, like her.
It was Zonia who was talking, and then.
Okay, Zonia, you go first, and then Ninetales can go. Okay, or just.
So they are the norm.
She's telling me that I
that
would admit
is
this, though,
okay. So the pseudo academic should shut the fuck up.
Okay, all right. Rose, what was your point?
I don't know. I like related to this. I mean, my new point would just be like, I don't know. It does feel like I'm a binary trans person who I would say like tries to touch grass and meets IRL normal trans people. Seems like the dominant opinion among like binary trans people that are not super online is actually that non-binary people should be like fought for and considered trans and like under the same umbrella. Like they might not be like super into, or they might think like kit kat pronouns or whatever are like silly, but I don't think that they think like non-binary people should be like excluded.
But just to be clear, that was the main argument from the beginning, is that it was like the neo-pronoun stuff that was kind of getting people off course. Sorry. But that like neo-pronoun stuff was kind of getting people off course, not so much.
Sorry, I forgot.
It does seem like we progressed to talking like broadly about non-binary people and whether they should be included. And I think if we're going to talk about what normie trans people think, it seems like the majority do. But non-binary people should be included. Yeah.
I mean, Jenny, do you are you against non-binary people who aren't like using neopronouns and gender abolitionists? Like, would you be against them being under the umbrella as well?
Okay, so my issue is the conflation of medically transitioning and non-medically transitioning. I know that there are non-binary people who medically transition. I have my own thoughts about them. I think that they're basically coping with one of a few things, but I won't expand too much on that here. But I think those people have a legitimate claim to be transsexual. If you're going through a medical transition, then that's fine. You're like me in that respect. We have that in common. We have enough of that to, I think, form a coherent community. I'm not listening to anything.
No, be quiet, Jesus Christ.
So I don't have any problem with that. But other than like I have a problem with like all the neopronoun shit and whatever. I don't call people like it's or Ziza or any shit like that.
But are non-binary people like trans? They're not transsexual. They're transgender though, right?
Yeah,
like,
you should mute yourself. Sorry, what was that?
Do you consider non-binary people like who don't do the neopronoun stuff? Like, are they transgender? Like, they're not transmet. Obviously, you differentiate between transsexuals.
I don't use the term. I don't use the term transgender. I reject it outright.
I knew she would say that. I knew she would say that. Yeah, a lot of people feel that way.
Base.
Okay.
I don't
see.
Feel
this isn't like a super minority view. There are like a lot of people who feel like me.
But does non-binary is non-binary existence valid?
It does seem like
what does that mean?
So
like, should we support people's fucking endeavor in having a non-binary existence, whether that's through like accommodate the same way we might accommodate people based on sex, like traditionally?
Yeah, of course.
I haven't really seen a good argument for treating them or for giving them the same kind of treatment that we give to trans women, for example.
I think it's valid. It's just irrelevant to the trans conversation.
That's sort of the argument here. Is like I don't think any. Well, I speak. Jenny has expressed different opinions, but overall, yeah, as Rose is stating, the support for non-binary people is pretty solid. But what they're talking about, as I was mentioning before, is the prioritization of the needs of the medical needs of binary trans people, which are a very specific thing and move in a very specific direction. And so it's talking about prioritizing those kinds of needs.
Well, the problem was the ideologies being mixed together. It was the gender abolitionist, neo-pronoun sorts of ideas, that ideology being mixed in with people who...
To elaborate on that a little bit, I think that non-binary identity is inherently gender abolitionist. I agree. The whole, well, exactly. So you can't really separate the two things. So to accommodate any of it, is to accommodate all of it.
You can be non-binary. Isn't the state of being non-binary acknowledging that a binary exists and that you exist outside of it? That's acknowledging the binary.
I think if they called themselves, crap, I'm blanking on the word, but where you're between the two binaries.
Agender.
Anyways, if they didn't call themselves non-binary and instead were saying that they were between the two genders, that would make perfect sense. But calling themselves non-binary makes it sound like they exist off of the spectrum, and that seems ridiculous.
The reason why
androgynous, yes, it's androgynous, yes. If they call themselves androgynous,
I've got one
that would
question
make more sense.
trans med people on the panel, right? Because a lot of the
can I just answer that last
politics-
question? I've been asked one question. I haven't had a chance to answer it. Okay, so the fucking hell. I'm blanking. Okay, can you ask the question again?
It was you're not gender abolitionist if you're non-binary because you're recognizing that the binary exists, and yeah.
Okay, so the way that we think about non-binary today is not as like some third gender specifically that has its own set of rules, like its own, I don't know, pronoun, own trend, way of dressing, anything like that, like it would have done in the past. And it also rejects sex segregation of gender. Our modern conception of non-binary doesn't just mean a gender outside of the binary like those would be. It means specifically this choose your own adventure gender, where you get to pick everything about it. It is in and of itself a rejection of gender.
Yeah, there's no entailment. There's like jibber jabber. Look, so I got a question for the trans men on the panel, and there's
Right.
a lot of the arguments. Have been
I hope you
made
have
about
some actual
optics.
arguments too, and not just some dumb circular shit like the.
That's great. Okay, look, let me finish my
I only got like a couple. I gotta
moderate your fucking panel.
I gotta.
I won't
get
mute
the
you.
fuck- I gotta get
I
to
won't
bed
mute
'cause
you.
I
I
gotta.
don't give a fuck.
I got a 7 a.m. EEG I gotta do,
Wonderful.
so
There's no
I
reason-
can't really stick around for much
Yo,
longer.
Food
But,
Shop, since was
maybe
it-
do a little
didn't he-
close
since he didn't get
argument
to ask the
thing.
question. Jenny cut off Food Shops. That was some bullshit.
He
Okay,
was
Zonia wants to
disrespecting me. I
give
don't know what else
closing
to say.
arguments real quick.
All right.
Yeah, Jenny's disrespecting non-binary.
All right. So
cry me a fucking river.
So
grow up.
In general,
All she did
people-
was describe what it was. That's literally all she did.
So yeah. Anyways, I do think we do have
She
an
described
issue
what it was.
of talking over
parasite.
people
Good job.
and
Wait,
idiot.
Ninetales,
You know-
please be quiet. I like the conversation between Rose and everybody else, okay? And that's what seems like a productive conversation. Just please, Ninetales, okay? Just for the love of God, okay?
There's this male socialized issue. Toxic masculinity tends to carry its way into a lot of the trans women's community because they don't really learn how to not talk over people and not talk down to them and not condescend to them, and they act like, you know, basically you're brutish men that they came from because they were raised to be that way and raised to dominate the room. Never really learned how to be
I've
the
seen you do that, Sonia.
feminine types. But anyways,
What about the times you've done
hey, well, at least I don't go around talking
But
about having
anyways,
to
ignore that.
eliminate Jewish supremacy, huh? So, yeah, fuck off, you Nazi.
Neither do I.
Anyways, yeah, well, I've got video evidence
sure.
of you actually talking about it. So, I'll link that in the group chat.
No, you got
actually.
something flipped out of
So,
context because you're a
anyways,
shitty
What are we
person.
talking about right now?
You don't have no standards
Alright,
for what
sorry,
you
no,
say.
we gotta take a break.
Woo.
Alright.
Maybe we should link the shit where she's defending pedophilia too. We should do that.
Zonia, please give me freaking closing arguments,
No more talking
Michael.
about
Shit.
nine. No more talking about nine. Just continue.
All
Just
right.
continue with a productive conversation. I want a productive conversation. Just go.
I
all right.
think people
Wait,
can.
food chops, wait,
I
food
think
chops,
people
food
can
chops.
identify however they want. I tend to respect people's identities, but there is a problem of things like feeling very spread thin, and this is something that I've seen a lot of people talk about who do political advocacy and lobbying for LGBTQ causes, that they're finding it more and more difficult to get traction on trans progress and trans issues, and that part of the problem is that they're being convinced, we're talking progressive Democrats who do want to support trans causes, they're being a little convinced that things are getting a little out of hand and that they don't know which end is up anymore because everything's getting pulled in every different direction. And this is something that's it's becoming an issue for us. And I think that we're giving a lot of ammunition to, groups like Libs of TikTok and fucking Matt and so Matt Walsh and such and Tucker Carlson that is chipping away at the support that we could have and weakening our position.
but-
So it would be nice if we could put a little bit more focus on driving home goals that we know we can win on, that we can substantiate with, actual sound science because that's the kind of stuff that we can do better with and come together with and win over. And if we try and go rah, 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 Mr. Politician, Mrs. Politician person, could you please support all these people with these crazy Zer and fair pronouns and put legislation in for this, that causes issues and it gets confusing. And especially when we have this growing whole social mob mentality of dogging and mobbing the people who advocate for trans issues but don't advocate for them broadly enough to be perfect enough, and so we want to cancel them. Brianna Wu being a perfect example of that, and Anna Kasparian being another perfect example of that, where we will just throw the baby out with the bathwater, despite their long history of advocating for us and doing quite a good job of it. So that's my closing statement. And Ninetales is a fucking pedophile Nazi.
Okay,
Done.
All right. Rose did not get a chance to discourse all that much whatsoever, so I think she should have the floor.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Okay, so first thing is, I don't know if there was something you're referencing specifically, Zonia, but I don't know who's advocating for like legislation making Zer pronouns like legally recognized. I don't know who's ever asked for that. If it is a thing, then I guess that sounds a little bit silly. Maybe, I don't know. There's probably like
She's
10
gone,
people
by the
it
way.
applies to in the whole fucking country. So it's like, see, I've never heard anyone ask for that. And then second of all, it doesn't seem like that's the type of issue that's driving this like faltering in support of trans people among Democrats, right? It seems like the issues that are driving that are really the sports issue, which is a binary trans issue mostly, and kids transitioning, which is a binary trans issue mostly, right? So it just doesn't seem to be the case that the drivers of this are things that are not about binary trans people.
The reason why the kids transitioning stuff is such a problem, the reason why that's such a problem is because so many people under the age of 18 now identify as trans, and but they are overwhelmingly non-binary, non-transitioning. They're they fabs.
And
that creates the perception.
It's breast removal too.
I'm not finished with my point. I'm not finished with my point.
That's
And
the
this
surgery that's being
this
done.
creates the perception that there are that a shitload of those people are now getting these transition-related surgeries, that they're all like taking hormones now, when they aren't. Okay, it's because people are scared because they see trans everywhere and they think, oh shit, this is a brainwashing cult, and they're taking all our kids into it.
I don't think that the reason that they're concerned about kids transitioning is because they're concerned that some people with neo-pronouns might like transition. I think they just don't want kids to transition in general, even if they're binary, right? Like,
but I think conflating the non-binary, like, I don't, I would like to remain presenting like a female, but I don't want breast, is a lot more common than you think. And I think conflating the two makes like trans affirming care sound like really dangerous.
Why didn't they care 20 years ago? Why wasn't there this same outcry that there is now? The reason is because of visibility. It's because it's fucking everywhere. Okay.
That the visibility.
Kids were able to transition 20 years ago.
How is the visibility itself just a function of these specific groups of like non-transitioning neo-pronoun users, right? The visibility
because
is
the
also
overwhelming majority of
binary
trans people are those people, and they're
I
speaking for
disagree.
us.
I disagree.
This is factually true. They
That
are.
the majority of trans people are fucking neo-pronoun users. What's the source for that?
No, that they are non-transsexuals.
Okay, now it sounds like we're talking about a different group.
No, we're talking about a group
So
that is
the worry
overwhelmingly non-binary
is that
people.
non-transsexuals are transitioning. That's what conservatives are worried about. That sounds weird. Doesn't sound right.
No, they're worried that they think that trans, in your terms, is a social contagion, and they think that it is infecting like thousands and thousands of kids. This is why people like Matt Walsh can go on Joe Rogan and say and make a ridiculous claim like, I think there are millions of kids on puberty blockers, and people will just blindly believe it because there is undeniably this huge trend of kids who now say, oh, I'm trans because of this non-binary shit that's been pushed.
I don't know. It's just
Like,
not clear to me. It's just not clear to me that that's having a big effect on like how conservatives and even moderate people view like kids transitioning. I feel like basically the amount of the proportions of support and not supporting it would be about the same if we did whatever you're like prescribing in terms of advocacy and sort of
If
separating
it was
them.
treated as
Doesn't
the
feel like that's
rare
big a
medical
fact.
condition that it is, people would think about it the same way that they did 20 years ago. They wouldn't really care. You know, people like, do you remember when Jazz
I don't know
Jennings
that that's true.
transitioned in the public eye? People were kind of apprehensive about it, but it wasn't this visceral, okay, we got to ban this, we need a blanket, full stop, no under 18s can transition at all. That wasn't really a thing. I mean, it was in some respects, but it was nothing like it is now.
Okay, do you think there's any like extent to which the current anti-trans outrage is like manufactured as an artifact of like Republicans' anti-gay efforts failing in terms of like gay marriage becoming legal and stuff, and then just moving to the next group?
Somewhat,
right? Like,
but that doesn't mean we have to give them ammunition for it.
I think we
I think
gaslight
that
that
to the
position
extent
as
that it's
well when we
ammunition,
don't.
it's so tiny that it's probably outweighed by the good that
If
we
it's
do by
so
accepting
tiny,
those
then
people.
why does
Yeah.
it make up so much of their talking points?
I don't think it does, though. I don't think it does.
Okay,
It
well
makes
then
up
you're just not
some
paying
amount.
attention.
No, that's
And
you're
I
just
can't
wrong,
really
right?
do anything about that.
That you're just you're making an assertion that's just untrue, right? Like, so if you look at polling, right, the things that people are uncomfortable with about the trans movement, none of them explicitly reference non-binary people. You can say that the fact that there's this rise in like neopronoun non-binary people contributes to how much of a problem conservatives think it is because of the number of people. But that's just going to be a pretty small effect. It's not going to be a primary driver.
Wait,
right?
but do you
Such
not
that I
think that
that
education on these issues is
ideology-
going to be better if there aren't people who are gender abolitionists kind of muddying the water and making things more confusing with stuff like neopronouns?
I mean, I think it's contextual. I think it's contextual. I don't think every single time you're arguing for something like trans healthcare, you have to mention fucking neopronouns as like an honorary thing. That like these are also valid, by the way.
You're
Like,
getting
I think
way
it's
too hung up on the
contextual.
neopronouns.
It's like, I mean, sort of. Let me say that again.
You're getting way too hung up on the neopronouns.
Okay, well,
specifically.
earlier when I was talking about just non-binary people broadly, someone corrected me and said the conversation was about neopronoun users. So I don't know. I jumped in sort of late. Just trying to
Okay, well, maybe
go
that
off of what I've
specific
heard.
conversation was, but we aren't talking about that anymore.
I think that like
Sorry, I
when
was
you-
saying
when you
that the
try to
exclusion
position-
of non-binary people was about the fact that they were using neopronouns, and it was specifically non-binary people that use neopronouns and that are gender abolitionists. It wasn't necessarily like non-binary people as a whole.
Yeah, and so yeah, the more specific group you're just talking about was, I guess, the group I was talking about. But I don't know. Sorry if that's not what you meant to the other person. I don't know.
Another thing is that the arguments that activists make are very weak in this respect, because the best arguments for transition and for letting under 18s transition in some cases rely pretty heavily on transmedicalism, of this understanding of sex dysphoria being a thing that you can't really treat, that it's not really a matter of just identity. It's like sex dysphoria is a mental illness, and you need to take that seriously. You need to treat it seriously. And when you make it like a matter of just identity, and you say, oh, okay, well, there's all these like thousands of kids who now identify as trans, and look how many of them grow out of it in a few years. You know, like that wasn't really the case again, like 10, 15 years ago. So you're creating all of these reasons for them to doubt that kids transitioning is a good thing.
Like I said, I
Conservatives
mean,
are
I
capitalize on the fact that we're
understand that in
conflating
sort of,
these things amongst ourselves.
Exactly.
I understand that in like, no, I've like, I get your position, right? I've heard it a few times now. So I get that in sort of an indirect way. It probably contributes to some extent, right? My claim is just that it doesn't seem like it's the main driver. It seems like the main driver is stuff that like would be basically just as bad, maybe slightly less bad in terms of blowback if like we did your prescription in terms of activism.
If you acknowledge that it's a problem at all,
Well,
and
yeah,
you
well, no,
imply that
here's
it's a
the thing
small
though,
one,
right?
and
No,
if
but
it's a
here's the
small
thing.
problem that enough people
Well, no.
recognize, then it should be small enough to like solve,
Well, no,
right?
the problem though is that
not,
there's also the benefit that those people get, right? Like I think like it just seems to be, it's probably the case, like in my opinion. I haven't thought about this a ton, I guess, but it seems like incorporating that group and like fighting for their recognition too, while having maybe some small drawbacks in terms of like binary trans people's goals, It's like the good just seems to outweigh the bad. I don't know. Doesn't seem
So
like a huge factor.
that's where the
Not even like
the parasitic characterization comes from, right?
The what?
That's where the parasitic
Well, I mean, you can frame it as
confirmation comes
parasitism if
from.
you want.
No,
Just
it
totally
is. It 100%
well, no,
is.
you have to admit that's
Because
an
trans
incredibly
acceptance
uncharitable
was
way of
based
framing it.
no
Right?
trans acceptance in law is based on the binary gender experience. So if trans non-binary people or
What do
non-binary
you mean
people
trans acceptance in law? What do you mean by that specifically? Like example, like if an example.
Your ability to change your pronouns on your driver's license, like your ability to access like medical health care, like there's so many different things, but it's built around the idea of gender, like binary gender people, and then non-binary people hop on, call themselves trans, and in that way it's parasitic.
I mean, like you could, like I understand that you could frame it that way, but I'm just saying, like you could also frame it as like a type of solidarity, right? Like, I mean, to some extent, right? Obviously, to not 100%, but like
why would we champion like priorities that are why would we champion priorities that are currently like working against our interests? Like, they're obviously working against our interests. So like, why would we stand in solidarity with that? Would you do the same thing?
From my view, I already gave you my reason, right? Because from my view, it seems like a pretty small cost for what seems to be like a bigger benefit for that group of people who are like pretty hated by a lot of people, right? Giving them at least some community they can fit in with that like is that, and yeah, we can sort of
they
like
have taken over our community.
over the way. I mean, so how is that a response to what I'm saying, right? Like,
because why would we give them that? Why would we let them take everything?
Well, when
all
you
of our
frame it in this
spaces
really
are dominated
adversarial
by
way, I get why it sounds not appealing, but I'm as another binary trans person, I'm telling you that to me it seems like the costs don't outweigh the benefits, right?
When you say solidarity, I hear capitulate every single time.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, like, do you see how like every response for the past like 3 minutes to me has just been rephrase what I said in a less charitable way, right? Like, it seems to me that the benefits are greater than the costs. I get that you can frame it as parasitism or whatever. It's just not an interesting analysis to me.
Like, okay, you haven't even acknowledged the fact that these are distinct categories and there are
what
good
distinct
reasons.
Categories? What two categories have I not acknowledged are distinct?
The categories of transsexual and transgender.
When did I say that those are not? When did I say they're the same category?
You are saying.
You're implying it.
You implied it by saying by saying that we should include these people under our umbrella in our communities. That we should give them that because you don't think the cost is significant enough. You call it solidarity.
You implied it when you said solidarity too.
Let me help you. The 1v2, one at a time, all right?
Yeah. Let me help you since you clearly don't understand how the fuck like terms work, right? Like transsexual is a smaller umbrella that is under the transgender umbrella, right? There's no conflation between the terms. I don't think they're the same thing, right? That's just not true. I think
you're capitulating the entire idea right now.
Person that is transgender, right? I'm not saying
absolutely is because every use of transsexual from before the 1990s has now become a use of transgender. One has supplanted the other entirely. That transsexual
so you're saying
isn't a term that's
view them as the same.
I'm saying
the claim that you made
everyone treats them as one. That this identity of transgender has supplanted transsexual.
Okay, I just want to bring you back to the fact that what I was responding to is the claim that I was conflating these throughout the conversation or not recognizing a distinction, which is just untrue, right? I know that the terms mean different things. One of them refers to transitioning medically. One of them doesn't refer to that clearly, right? I understand.
You are conflating because you think that we should
literally not
work towards benefiting. Well, you kind of are because you're saying that we should work to the benefit. We should work against our own interests because it benefits like a small minority of people who believe they're in our same categorization.
Yeah, and I think that like gay, lesbian, and bi people should have fought harder for trans people, even though trans people were optically like an issuesome for them at many points in like history, right? Like,
in the most ironic way possible, gender is not equivalent to sexuality. Can we talk about something a little bit more relevant?
Well, it's not identical, but it's analogous in the way that we're talking about, right? We're saying one group that has some more political capital than another group that is a subgroup of that group should fight for that less advantaged subgroup, right? In a lot of cases, when it seems like the benefits outweigh the costs, which it does to me here, and it would have to me as like a bi person in like the 80s or like 90s. I would say we should fight hard for trans people, even though it's optically a little bit burdensome for like the gay movement.
It's not just optically a little bit burdensome. The joining of these groups under one umbrella and rejecting the difference between them, which the term transgender and the way that it's used do that, have like obvious negative effects on. Yeah, you can sit there and sigh all you like, but you're just not engaging in the actual argument. You're just doing this semantic bullshit.
I'm just like disappointed because it's such like boring analysis, right? Like
I'm just disappointed.
The claim was that I was conflating them and not recognizing them, and it's like,
well,
no,
that's
I
an
really
intelligent
wasn't.
criticism
So
of
now the
something that
claim-
we're saying is like actually the case, right? So I don't know what's more
Well,
boring,
no,
like you saying it
I've
is,
given my
or
point
you
of view.
providing
I've
like an
given my
actual
point of view,
argument
like,
against
4
what she's
times.
saying.
I've given my point of view like 4
circles.
times, and then
Yeah, but
it's
ignores.
just not a satisfactory response. Like you just haven't given a satisfactory response. I'm really sorry. You can try again if you want. But like,
I think your retort completely ignores the entire foundation of what we're saying, right? So I
No,
don't know. Maybe
not
we
really,
should move
though.
on because we're talking
Not
past
really,
each other.
though. Doesn't really,
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely,
No,
it
not
does.
really.
Because you're ignoring the fact that we are working against our own interest by having somebody in our own whatever pool or
No,
categorization
I'm literally
that is
granting
incestuous,
that.
like
I
that
don't
is
know.
parasitic.
I don't know
No,
if you're
you
not
aren't
following.
granting that. You aren't granting that because in all of
I don't know
your
if you're not following.
rebuttals, no, in all of your rebuttals, it exclusively excludes that because it's
No,
convenient
it
to you in this
doesn't.
argument.
No,
Yes,
she
it does.
included that when she was talking about gay people trying to advocate for trans people within the LGBTQ
no, that's
movement.
completely different.
It's not, because even they are even more of a separation
The sexuality piece is
than.
irrelevant. The sexuality piece was irrelevant for when she
not
brought it up,
irrelevant.
and it's
Now-
not analogous to right now. It is
Hold
not.
on, just listen. Gay
Absolutely,
sexuality is so much more different than gender than trans is from like non-binary, right? Those are a
Okay,
lot
do you
closer
think-
to one
okay,
another
do you think
than
the
trans
LGBT
and gay people. Yet she still expected them to advocate on behalf of the other
Okay,
people.
do you think trans people being associated with like the gay rights movement and like gays and lesbians hurt their movement? I think it did. I do think it did, and yet I still think that it's good that they fought for trans people. Like, I don't know why the fuck you can't track my argument. I've been like 4 times. I'm granting to you that it's like hurts binary trans issues in some way. I'm literally fucking granting that. You're just not tracking. I'm saying that the benefits outweigh the costs likely. Like, what? Just engage with the actual argument.
Based on what? And also, why do we owe them? Why do we owe those people anything?
Like, oh is a weird way to frame it. I think doing morally good things is good, right? I think it's helpful. It benefits people. I care about people. I care about disadvantaged groups, not just my own.
Okay, that's
You're
not an
still
argument.
working
Tell
from
me
the trans-
why.
You're working
Tell
from the
me
trans umbrella.
why I should care about
The
them.
dishonest way to approach the conversation if you say you're
Oh,
granting the
well,
things that we're saying.
dumb semantic dispute that I have. I don't care. Make an argument, right? It's the
Well,
same
You
thing.
haven't made the case for why it's worth that cost. You're just saying, yeah, it is.
All of your premises are based on the benefit of like it being more beneficial to include them than it is to not. That's
Okay, so
based
you
on the
admit what you
idea
said
that you
before?
include non-binary people in your trans umbrella. We clearly do not. So when you frame an argument, you are absolutely removing that from like the reality, and you're trying to present it not as such. That's what you're doing.
I mean, not really though, right? I'm not saying all non-binary people are transsexual. I'm saying
Yeah, I tried explaining the LGBTQ thing, and this is, I don't think this is Rose Moe. No shot this is Rose Moe. Is it? No way. Rose Moe is not capable of making arguments like this. This is somebody else. It's gotta be. Yeah, no, that's not Rose Moe. Wait, did I just... Oh, whoops. Yeah, they're definitely like ignoring most of her argument here and not really engaging with it very much. It's kind of... I tried explaining it on the like gay within the LGBTQ label, and they're just not engaging with that whatsoever. They're like doing kind of what the other people were doing earlier, where they're just kind of like making fallacious arguments now. And she's right, like they were just like rewording a lot of what she was saying to like, you know, well, I call that exclusion. I call that, you know, parasitic. I call that this. And it's like, okay, cool, but like that's not really helpful.
And some type of inclusivity around is good. It makes them not fucking socially alienated. It makes them not fucking depressed. Right?
If I reject the premise of non-binary, why should I accept them? Why should I offer them my space? When you recognize that that comes at a cost to me and people like me.
Like I've just said like three or four times now.
You just said you think it's good. I'm asking why it's good.
You asked how it benefits them, and I gave you benefits. So
I didn't ask why it benefits them. It's clear how it benefits them.
It benefits us all, even if it fucks us over.
Well, you're saying, okay, us, yeah, like I'm part of that group, right? I understand the costs, right? I'm saying I think there's a benefit that's greater, and I think we have a duty to other groups that are disadvantaged, that share at least some struggles with us. Not all of them, they share some struggles. Like people thinking that they're a freak, or people thinking their identity is weird, like things like this, and just like using the wrong name for them, using the wrong pronouns for them. There are some social struggles that we share. And I think we owe it to this group of people that is like super fucking socially isolated and has a lot of bad outcomes, that like we provide some level of support and camaraderie and understanding and openness to them.
I know that you think that. Can you explain why?
Yeah.
Why should I? Why? You're not. You're just saying, oh, well, helping them's good, therefore let's do it.
No, I will. I've explained like 4 times, but I will again. I think
you haven't actually. You might think you have, but you really haven't.
I literally have.
Just let it out.
So I've literally said, like, I don't know how many times I have to restate the same thing, right? I'm granting that there's some impeding, but I think it's really small, probably not even like a secondary or tertiary factor, some degree to which including these groups is like impedes on some binary trans goals. But I'm saying the benefits to that group of people outweigh the costs. And I think pushing, like, I don't know, because of the fact that it doesn't seem like this is a primary factor, it seems like if we can like sort of move the Overton window like a little to the left of where we need it, it will actually pay dividends in the long run, even if in the immediate term it's maybe rough for binary trans people. Like I think in the long term it might actually be better for us, right? Because like then we're not the fucking wall anymore, right? There's another group that's the wall.
I think you're still not answering the question, right? Like, do y'all? Is the question being answered?
She's saying that there are intersectional. She's saying that there are intersectional like issues that both groups worry about, and that advocating on behalf of them will still be beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, I think in the long run,
we don't want to be we don't want to be a martyr for gender ambivalence. Sorry.
Well, I mean, right? If I had reason to believe, and if
that's what you're reducing us to.
Okay, can I respond with you're interrupting me, please? Right. So, like, if I did the utility calculus,
yes,
and it really
let's let Rose respond. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So, if I did the utility calculus, and it really seemed to me like I had reason to believe that, like, accepting with and sort of like associating this group of people with us actually was maybe like a primary driving factor in transphobia, and there was like a clear movement in the polls where like the main things Republicans were focusing on are like, yeah, these like other pronouns and weird stuff like this, and there was reason to believe that also like these people were the main drivers behind like medical care being restricted, then I would say, yeah, it's probably not worth it to like stick our necks out for this group. But it just seems to be that it's like not even like a secondary factor. Like, it just doesn't seem like that big a cost.
Republicans are capitalizing on the trivialness of the movement. Binary trans women are based in like medical procedures and actual science, and being non-binary is like an abstract thought process of the gender experience.
Do you think Republicans care about actual science? By the way,
they care about capitalizing on what they can find the weakest point in an opposing movement. And now that weak point is trivialness.
Hold on. So Neve, whenever I hear Republicans talk, the thing I hear them talk about is the idea that men can turn into women and boys can turn into girls being inherently flawed in itself. They do not talk about the non-binary identity. They don't even know what the fuck that is.
Oh, I
Actually,
highly
they are
disagree with that.
No, they are talking about it when they talk about their young daughters
They
going home
conflate them.
and trying to get mastectomies. They conflate all the ideas together, and that's the issue. Thanks for building my point.
Oh my
Yeah,
god,
but
Yun,
that's-
thank you. Finally, it's a 2v2. Thank God, Yun. Okay, oh my god.
Okay,
Yeah, but
so Jenny,
okay,
hold
go
on
ahead,
real
go
quick.
ahead.
Sorry, Rose.
All good.
Jenny and Neve knows I'm on Rose's side on this. I'm not a gender abolitionist, but I'm also not a trans med. I think it's fine to have non-binary people. I think they can coexist with trans people in the same movement. And I think that that movement can be successful and it'll be good for both trans people and non-binary people. That's what I think. Just wanted to make that clear. Rose, sorry for interrupting you.
All right.
I don't remember what I was going to say, so
Okay.
someone else can respond.
Well, someone else here.
Hold on, it's not about whether it makes sense or not, or whether it's like the utility calculus of does it like is it going to be like it like cost benefit analysis of like helping binary trans people if we include non-binary or not. I just think it doesn't make sense. Like, you know how there's like the big fucking pan LGBTQ flag that includes like black and brown and all these things. It's like, okay, yeah, like LGBTQ spaces are like usually welcoming to like minorities as well, but that doesn't mean when you fight for one you have to be fighting for all of them at the same time. Like, just because there's camaraderie or some sort of like intersectionality in these places doesn't mean that we have to conflate it in like aspects of advocacy. Like, you can advocate for LGBTQ rights without advocating for like black rights or whatever, even if LGBTQ spaces are often spaces that are safe for like
part
black
of the
and brown
argument
people.
is over whether or not they're even calling them trans in the first place. So
is that the battle lines of this particular argument at this moment? I'm actually not completely sure.
Jenny
They
thinks
keep
that
switching back
non-binary
and
people
forth,
aren't
talking
trans.
past each other so hard right now because I keep talking about the cost benefit analysis, and then other people are talking about like semantically should be grouped this like group under this umbrella. It's like I don't know. That's sort of like
so we are doing the cost benefit analysis. That's what.
Let's talk about the cost benefit analysis.
We are doing the cost benefit analysis.
For who? For who? It's
It's
not a
for
semantic
the
argument
total
if we
of-
don't
the
address that
total
from
of
the
everyone
very
involved?
beginning.
The
No, it's
total
not a
of everyone
semantic argument if we
involved?
don't address that at the very beginning.
I'm sorry, can I just ask real quick? I thought it was the cost benefit analysis of calling all of them trans. Is that not what you're talking about?
That's a part
it's
of
not
it, yes.
just calling all of them trans, but that's a part of it. Yeah, it's like
Okay.
also just associating them with our goals, like pushing for them at the same time that we're like not like yeah, including them as like a major part of the conversation. Like I don't know, when we start to get more specific about what we're actually talking about in terms of like pragmatic considerations, it just becomes clear to me that it's like highly contextual, like what we're arguing for and when. Clearly, there are contexts, like when it's super relevant to talk about just fucking medical, like trans medical issues, right? Clearly that there are contexts where that's like what you should talk about and it's irrelevant and not helpful to bring up like neopronouns or whatever group of people, right? But like in like, I just think that there are times where it clearly doesn't have much of a harm and it helps those people. And I don't know why we should actively avoid trying to like, I don't know, grant these people some of the social capital we're trying to accumulate.
You know what? I can concede to
around.
that if
Can I go?
The fact that you're doing the cost benefit analysis for non-binary people exclusively
Well,
right
it's
now.
for everyone
and
involved.
I can
For
concede
everyone
that.
involved, right?
I can
It's like
The
concede that.
rhetoric around medical
But if you're
transition is
including
currently
bio-
you don't need dysphoria to be trans, and you don't need to medically transition to be trans. How is that helpful for me? It undermines people's understanding of what it means to be trans. I'm taking significant harm as a trans person that I do not think is worth it. And I know your argument is, well, it is worth it, but I just don't think it is. And I don't think you've made a good case as
Great.
to why
Now
that is.
both of
or
my mods
why.
are here. It's fantastic.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, like, if there's some way we can try to get more concrete so I can make the case better, then I can try, I guess. But it's just like, I think if we were to do some like robust empirical investigation of the situation, we would find that like the drivers are just not the things that we're concerned about, that we're talking about right now, like of transphobic hate and like trans medical issues, right? I think, yeah, the problem isn't, I don't know, pronouns or like non-binary people or social contagion as much as it's literally like right now they're not even talking about social contagion. They're talking about grooming by parents, like chopping babies' dicks off, right? That's what they're talking about right now. Science
Yes,
has nothing
absolutely.
to do with
That is the
non-binary.
majority of the discussion, like unequivocally. Do you guys even disagree with that? Like,
No,
surely
their
you.
argument, their counter to
That is a big chunk of it.
I think
That is
if
a
you
big
want
chunk of
to
it. The
address,
frequency, you You haven't acknowledged that it's the frequency of transness among young people, and where transness is this nebulous concept of self-identity that is causing this huge uptick in the number of trans people that is making people freak the fuck out.
Do you think that the number of binary trans people hasn't also exponentially increased? Because it has.
Not to anywhere near the same level.
Okay, so I just don't think that additional like growth in the level of people identifying as trans that aren't even getting medical care is like the driver of, is even a like secondary driver of the anti-medical care like legislation, right? Really doesn't seem to be. I think if we
No, it totally is. It totally is, bro. Because if you see, because when Republicans see trans identity is on the rise, like what is the majority of trans identity, right? It's like women in college who are non-binary, right? And it's like if we see like this fucking
that's not who they're thinking of, though. That's not who they're thinking of as the main problem.
If they see, well, no, but when they see these numbers and they don't contextualize it, like Eunice saying, like they don't care about the non-binary people. No, but they see, the rise, but they see the rise in the discourse and the amount of people IDing this way, and they don't even care that it's non-binary, and they're not even seeking any medical transition or hormonal transition or anything. They just see there's this number of trans people rising, and they're like non-binary females, and so they just use that as a way to stoke fear about the cutting dicks off and things like that. So yes.
So if non-binary people that aren't actually transitioning to another gender and aren't using hormones are your concern, then why would that be the concern of fucking Republicans who are concerned with kids using hormones?
Because they use that as a basis
they don't
to
care.
say, see this trans
ideology.
Hold on. They use that as a basis to say, look, the trans ideology is being spread everywhere, and then they fearmonger about the like crazy things. Like the majority, like seven. Hold on, like it's like with the border. This is exactly like with the border. Like 7 million people have crossed the border in the past 4 years, right? There have been 7 million border encounters. How many of those people are actually bringing over drugs and stuff like that? Like a tiny amount of people are actually bringing drugs and crime over from the people who are immigrating, but they still use the 7 million number to fucking stoke fear about the crimes of the drugs, even though it's like a tiny amount of people. It's like the same.
But they're not using the 7 million number. I've never heard Republicans cite this is the amount of people who identify as trans to like fearmonger about trans people. I've personally never heard that. Maybe it's happened once or twice. The majority of the conversation is about trans children taking like fucking surgeries and hormones to the opposite sex, and that's what their fear is. Their fear is not people identifying as.
When you take
hold on, let me finish. Let me finish. I'll get to that, Neve.
Okay.
I just want to make this point. Non-binary people who don't transition are less of a threat in conservatives' mind to actual trans people. Can we just acknowledge that?
True.
Yes.
So why are we hand-wringing about non-binary people not being appealing enough to conservatives when it's the opposite argument?
It's not just conservatives we're losing support with. We're losing support with every demographic, even with progressive people. And I don't think the progressive people are losing support for us because of trans children that are transitioning after going to the doctor. They're having this reaction to I don't think the progressive people are. I think the progressive people are seeing the shit that I'm seeing. They're like logging onto fucking Lex and they're seeing 25 people with beards and they're being told, why are you complaining? Gender's not real. It's like, it's fucking insane when you're like a progressive person and you want to stand for all the things that actually matter for trans people. And there are people who are unaffected by the fight for trans rights. Can we all just acknowledge that non-binary people who don't transition, don't take any drugs, are completely unaffected by the fight for trans rights? What's going to happen if their rights get taken away? They're fine.
It's not true, obviously.
It's a costume they can take off. It doesn't matter.
Wait, why is it not true, Rose? Why is it not true?
Because when they go into society, they're not looked at the same way that we are.
Exactly.
Like, don't
Socially,
the
they are
same
treated
things.
badly. Socially, they are treated badly. Like in the same way that binary trans people are. Obviously, they don't have all the same medical concerns and things like this, and concerns about passing, but they do have some of the same social concerns. It's retarded not to acknowledge that.
Wait, hold on. Social concerns, sure, but what happens when you misgender somebody who uses neopronouns? You're not causing dysphoria. If these people don't have dysphoria, what fucking happens if I don't call them it's? They're not even gonna feel like shit. They don't have dysphoria. It's just some fucking fun thing they do.
But no, but they're also just like disregarded and like treated as jokes and like treated as freaks, like in the same way that a lot of binary trans people are, just because of their preference.
Wow, could that be because it's a little trivial? I don't know. Maybe.
So you're saying that it's like fine when people are mean to them and shitty to them socially because they are cringy to you, is basically what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that people who are going to spend the whole time in an interaction staring at me or staring at someone else isn't going to be staring at a non-binary person who doesn't have dysphoria for the same fucking reason. They're going to be doing it because their hair is green or because they're wearing a fucking trans flag taped around their shoulders, but not because it's a fucking person who doesn't like conform to gender norms.
I mean, sometimes it is going to be because it's a person who doesn't conform to gender norms, right? I mean, not all of them, but there are non-binary people who don't look fucking like they don't clearly look like a woman or man. They actually look androgynous, right? There are non-binary people like that, and they do get shit on for their gender presentation. So I don't know why you'd say that.
Okay.
There are non-binary
Jenny,
people who
hold on.
transition, and those people are transsexuals, and there's no problem with them.
I think we know there's a difference between, I guess, if you want to say transsexuals and non-binary people who do not transition. Like, we all know that there's a difference in struggle. But Jenny, can I just get you on record saying, because I haven't heard you say this, do non-binary people suffer any social consequence whatsoever if they don't transition but are non-binary and that's somehow visible in their identity?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so on that basis,
I
like,
don't think
surely
their
it may not be the
identity
same
matters.
experience, but there is a shared experience of social rejection. It's not the same experience. Maybe it's not the same in severity or frequency or whatever.
Incels have
but
the same. Incels also have experience of social rejection. Should we include them?
It's insulting because no, it's literally insulting because
Incels are
trans women
different.
who actually no, absolutely not. It's insulting because trans women who actually like work towards transition or anyone who's doing that has to exist in society, go to school, go to work the way that they look. Like that is like a no. And then so what if you're you say you're non-binary, someone calls you she or someone calls you he, like instead of calling you they or whatever pronoun, like we want to go neo pronouns, they, whatever. Like it's not that it's not easy to say. I don't think that they should be misgendered, but you can't tell me that someone calling them not they is the same thing as somebody discriminating against like a binary trans person.
It may
There's
not be
no
the same
fucking
thing,
way.
but it
No.
may even be. Hold on, I want to make the argument. It may even be worse in some cases, because non-binary people can experience
No.
dysphoria. Hold on, non-binary people can experience dysphoria towards both genders. They can, not always, but they can.
no.
Can we just acknowledge that?
Can, yeah.
Internally.
No, I'm not going to acknowledge
Yeah,
that. I
but
think that's
if
bullshit.
someone
That's the stupid
Wait, but
fucking
it's
argument.
hold on. It's the same logic that trans people use. You experience dysphoria from one gender to the other.
The
You think it's
problem with the
impossible to do
studies
it
that
to both?
say the problem with the studies that say that they experience dysphoria for both genders are saying that they have a that they're targeting towards something that is off of the spectrum, which most of us just wouldn't call gender anymore, which means that we wouldn't call this gender dysphoria. It is some other type of gender, it's some other type of identity dysphoria that's going to be very different from what everybody else is talking
So
about.
what would the treatment be for these people then? Like fucking like the equivalent of like gay electric shock therapy, but for non-binary people? Like what would you have people do
just want us to
socially?
like leave them alone and like disregard them in every piece of discourse. Just
It would
be
still
like, oh,
be
yeah,
some
those
sort
people,
of
they
like
don't
social
exist. You guys can
transition.
have
It
them.
would just be
Okay,
very
no, hold on.
different.
They can do
I think
whatever they
Jenny.
want. I don't even say they're invalid. They're just
Well,
not
but they
trans.
want to do. Okay, well,
I think Jenny straight
I
up doesn't believe in non-binary people. I'm not on that. But my problem is that I think non-binary people and trans people are like a Venn diagram, and right now they're being treated like a small circle inside of a big circle. There are
That's fair.
there are non-binary people who are transsexuals who need like medication and shit. There are people who you would think are binary transsexuals, but who don't identify all the way as women or men. And that's fine. There's like no problem there. Those people are affected. Those people need rights too. But can we like can we separate out the part of the Venn diagram for non-binary people that isn't like overlapping with trans people? Because I feel like that's most non-binary people. That's most non-binary people.
I don't think there's any problem with like recognizing distinctions and subcategories. I don't think anyone is saying like non-binary people have all the same struggles as binary trans people. Like obviously that's not true, right? It's just that
But then
like
it doesn't make sense to say that non-binary people are trans. It doesn't make sense to say that they are trans. Some non-binary people are trans.
You said that these are subcategories of the same thing. We're rejecting that idea. We're saying they're not subcategories of the same thing. These are distinct experiences.
It doesn't seem to have anything to do with gender or sex.
Yeah,
Exactly.
They're literally lying
So,
before
Tom,
because
hold
you
on.
didn't make that distinction.
I don't know what
Holy
studies
shit.
you're referring to, but could you like link those somewhere so I could look at it? But aside from that, it's odd to me because we all like agree that gender theory is like useful, right? And in our understanding of gender theory, like broadly, we talk about non-binary people as if they exist within a similar construct to the one that binary trans people do. Like this is a completely uncontroversial thing. It's the majority opinion in like all philosophers of gender seem to think this, or not all, sorry, but like most. Like I don't know why it's so controversial right now when we're saying it as if it's like completely incomprehensible that like maybe non-binary people could share some experience that is in common with trans people that is like alienating their gender. I think sometimes you acknowledge it, but it's
You're
very
piggybacking off the idea of gender being a spectrum. When people are non-binary, they exist outside of that spectrum.
I don't
The
necessarily
ambivalence that
agree with
is
that. They don't
agreed
have
upon
to. They don't have to at
philosophers
all.
throughout society is the fact that people can be a mix of both genders naturally because it is a spectrum. People act in the way they act. But when you say that you're not on the gender binary or you exist outside of the fucking spectrum, what the fuck does that mean? You can't lie and tell me that somebody's been talking about that idea for like.
Well, could someone be gender fluid? Like that's possible, right?
Yes, but then they would fall into what I was saying before.
Okay, but I'm just saying it's clear that there are identities that are just distinct in behavior and experience from trans people, binary trans women and men, but they still have like similar struggles. And we're advocating on the basis that these similar struggles give them enough alike. Obviously, Jenny, I know you disagree vehemently with this, but if you'll allow us to lay out the argument a little bit, for one, we have evidence that you don't have to sacrifice that much in order to support non-binary people. We've made pretty big gains in, I know we're losing ground a little, like in trans rights in spite, quote unquote, of the non-binary thing. And I would say that has nothing to do with non-binary people. I think that has more to do with like other trans people discomfort with like non-binary people being lumped in and as the same, and they see it as different. But I think conservatives just see trans people as mentally ill and insane across the board.
True.
Like,
why is there a loss of ground?
Okay, I think if we're not being mentally ill and we're being pragmatic, then we wouldn't form allegiances based on fucking trauma. Why are we trauma bonding?
It's not solely trauma,
coalitions?
It's not solely
isn't that what
trauma.
you're implying by experience?
Yeah,
Obviously,
well,
the positive experience is fucking different. Obviously, it's different because we don't have the same priorities. So you must be talking about the negative experiences.
Okay,
and if you're talking about negative experiences, it's very likely that you're talking about trauma. So that sounds what you're alluding to right now.
But we had the whole BLM thing, and black people have different experiences across America. Do you think that was some kind of mistake on the part of black people to be like, I'm from fucking Michigan, you're from fucking California, we have a shared experience? Do you think that was some kind of mistake to be like, oh, there might be something here?
That's their prerogative. Ask a black person. I'm not black.
I'm black. I'm telling you, like it's.
Wait, hold on. But like an upper middle class black person who's conservative and who grew up in like a white neighborhood or whatever, and they say I disagree with the BLM movement, you would say, well, it's not trying to speak to you or for you, right?
With them. I don't care about the race thing. Like if you disagree with me and you're black, that's fine. If you disagree with me and you're non-binary or not, like I just don't care. But I'm just saying the idea that people can form a coalition and part of that can be their shared experience and part of that experience can be their trauma. I think that's totally fine. I think that's totally okay. I think that's how every social movement ever has worked and it's totally fine. It's effective.
Okay, I think it's fine to defend non-binary transsexuals. However, can anybody here tell me what is the use? What do we get out of defending neopronouns and xenogenders? What is gained through that?
Well, okay, so Rose, I don't know where you stand on this. Personally,
I was gonna let you go first if you wanted. Do you want to go or do you want me to go?
I just want to say, like, I'm a little bit unconvinced by the idea of xenogenders just because I think they them works well enough for most people. And maybe when we start getting into xenogenders, we legitimately are dealing with something different here. Like it's possible that the experience just doesn't match up with most non-binary people, and like that should be examined in like a separate way, especially because like most people who seem to fall into those categories are like autistic and stuff. So there's like clearly a lot going on there that we're not really like evaluating thoroughly enough to say that okay, these are the same thing. So I am kind of making, I guess, if you want to call it an exclusionary argument, like temporarily, I'm just like I think it's fine to use their identities socially and validate them if you like feel that it will make them feel bad. Otherwise, I don't really see much harm in that. But as for the idea being like holistically attached to the non-binary identity, I'm not convinced of that. So Rose, I don't know how you feel about that, but whatever.
Well, just to be clear, it seemed like everybody agreed on this as well.
It's a flag with a cat on it.
It seems like everybody agreed on that much before, is that like if we're talking about non-binary people who still actually fit within the binary, then like they have no issue with them. It is more so the xenogenders and neopronouns that everybody's talking about.
If we're all cool with saying that xenogenders and neopronoun shit is stupid, just to like bring it back to where this all started, can we all agree that like Brianna Wu's things that she was saying about like idiots pronouns are like stupid or dumb or we shouldn't respect them, that like that's not like a shitty or transphobic statement at all? Does anyone here think that the things she said about idiots pronouns are bad?
I don't
I don't
it's
think that
transphobic.
I don't think they're inherently that bad, but I think it's just I think it's funny that she like is sort of woke scoldy about trans stuff like publicly, and then privately has said like, I don't know, pretty edgy stuff. Like I don't think any of the things she said were super wrong in themselves. Like obviously there were mean things said about that one person's appearance and whatever, and I think yeah, I don't know, that its pronoun stuff is sort of whatever. But yeah, the main problem for me with Brianna Wu stuff was just like the sort of discrepancy between her public and private like views on this.
But how is it bad? How is it bad for her to be more progressive online? She's literally defending people that she doesn't even fully understand or agree with out of like the goodness of her heart. Like, isn't that something to commend?
Well, no, I think the problem, I mean, yeah, that itself is something to commend, but I think that if you are like a major political advocate, by the way, this is a huge diversion. Hopefully we can get back to the other thing. I think if you're a big like political advocate, literally works with like who's run for Congress and like works with congressional candidates and stuff on like policy stuff, which I think she has, and does like canvassing and has like a big fucking public persona, it's just really irresponsible to say stuff that like seemingly like contradicts your like public views in a group chat where there's like it's a fucking Twitter group chat, right? It's probably gonna get leaked. Like it's very irresponsible and dumb. It actually ends up being terrible optics. Like, oh shit, this person is lying about like all their positions, right? Like it almost seems like it would like her view would make more sense if it was like, I want to be politically effective, so I'm not going to talk about like its pronouns in public, but privately I actually think they're fine. But this position is actually just more confusing, right? It's the opposite, which is just very weird. It's like but it's also such a diversion. I don't know why we're talking about this again. Like I forgot my response to the last point because we diverted to fucking Brianna Wu, which like I don't want to talk about.
They were asking if you you took out like neopronouns and xenogenders and people like that, would you be okay with would you be okay with excluding them?
Okay, so I don't know what excluding means exactly. Neva is bringing up the cat flag shit. I have never seen this in my life, I'll admit. Maybe I'm not...
Literally the first thing that pops up when you Google it. That has to be worth something.
This so I'm not online enough.
I've seen it on Twitter many times.
This. I will say, the xenogender shit might be unironically too far. Like, I think we might all agree on that. Like, I think that might unironically just not be related in the way that we think it is.
I mean,
so
the reason that this whole discussion is I think the reason this discussion is just sort of confusing to me is because like whether we advocate for some group or tie in some certain group or defend some certain group is just going to be super highly contextual, right? Like if there's some conversation you're having with someone and like they're talking about like, oh, I'm kind of on the fence on trans issues or something like this, obviously fucking bringing up Z0 or like it's or like cat gender people is not going to be effective. It's probably going to be like, they're going to be like, what the fuck, this is just more confusing, right? But then on the other hand, if you have some situation where you're talking to a person and that person is like, I fucking hate people who use like neopronouns, I'm gonna like be super mean to them or like dunk on them or shit on them, it's like, I don't know, even if I don't think these people have many shared experiences with me as like a transsexual, it just seems like a waste of time and like kind of needlessly mean to like go out of my way to like be mean to these people. That's sort of my view on it, right? Like it's rarely going to be relevant at all to bring these people up like contextually when we're talking about trans stuff. In the rare instances it might be, I think it's okay to say like, don't be mean to these people, right? like either don't be friends with them if you don't want to fucking call them whatever pronouns that are kind of silly. Just don't be friends with them. Don't like harass them. Don't make fun of them. Don't call them like retarded for it. Like just disengage, right? Just don't engage with them. Like that would be
Yeah,
my
and I want
first
to reiterate, because I've been mostly in agreement with Nev and Jenny, but I completely agree with that. Like, as far as like an identity goes, you can identify as whatever you want. I don't freaking care. But it's when you start bringing pronouns in and gender aspects in that I think it starts to muddy the waters and confuse things. But as far as like having an identity, identify as whatever the hell you want. I don't care.
To clarify, that is like the only reason why I really care about this at all, is because it's joining these two things in a way that I think is unfair and harmful to us, significantly so that it just isn't worth any benefit these people might get. I don't think we owe them an umbrella for us to all exist under. I think that the harm far outweighs the good. I think it's clear that our community has been extremely diluted
Quickly,
and
which group of
prevented.
people? Quickly,
Can
which
I
group of
can I
people do
finish
you
my
mean?
point?
I'm just asking for clarification.
Okay. It has diluted our community. It's harder for us to relate to each other now. The meaning of trans has changed significantly. If I go to, I brought this up earlier. Well, early in my transition, I went to a few different trans spaces to try and meet people who were like me, and who I could share things with, who I could share this part of my life with that I just couldn't share with other people. And when I went to them, what I found was they were full of these they fab non-binary people. These people who weren't transitioning, who had like cut their hair and changed their pronouns and maybe started wearing trousers instead of skirts. And I didn't find any solidarity there from those people. I didn't find any relation to them. I couldn't really get on with them at all. There was just nothing in common. And that in and of itself is extremely harmful to us. We need our own space, our own community to advocate for ourselves. I don't think that bringing them in under this umbrella and saying we're all similar enough that we should share all our space, all our advocacy, all of this stuff, I don't think it's worth it at all. Because you're not, you used the word solidarity
All our
earlier, Rose.
space, all our advocy. Who said
Yes,
that? Like you're
we
implying
are,
that every
because
single
that
time
is
that
what's
anyone
happened.
discusses binary trans issues, like we have to we have an ethical obligation to shoehorn in like non-binary issues.
Are
That's
you
what it feels like
joking?
think
Do
I'm
you
saying.
not
I don't
hear
think
what
that.
activists talk about? Are
Okay,
you
well,
joking?
I'm just telling
This
you.
is how they
Well,
talk.
these are
This
our
is how
I'm telling you my
conversations
view.
go.
I'm just telling you my view. I'm just telling you my view right now. Do you get that? I'm just
Yeah,
saying
we
like.
can't speak to those people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
How are
well,
we
I'm
going to
talking about the.
change okay, so how are we going to change the discussion if you're like, if we can't voice it out,
I
right?
mean,
Like, isn't
I
that
just
part of the
don't think
issue?
there's that big of an issue right now. I think like it's a super online thing to be super up in arms about, right? I
Okay,
think
so
contextually there are times where it makes sense to advocate for both non-binary and binary trans people. I think, to be fair, right? I mean, I'll grant, I think the extent to which just like normal non-binary, especially like transitioning non-binary people should be associated with like binary trans people. I think that like those should be associated to a much greater extent than I think that like neopronoun using like non-dysphoric like AFAB people should be associated with us. Like there's basically like only a couple shared experiences we have with that latter group. But I do think like going out of the way to be mean to them or going out of the way to like dunk on them and be like, we're not like this group of people is probably a little bit shitty and unwarranted in most situations. It's just going to be contextual, right? Like all
I think the perception of it being a dunk is definitely like based on the way you look at it, right? Because I don't, like I said, I don't invalidate non-binary people. I just see the separation. So like if you, whatever you want to, however you want to describe yourself with, I have no problem indulging that. And I don't even see it as like a, oh, I'm doing you a favor kind of thing. It's simple. It doesn't require that much energy. But if I acknowledge what Yoon was saying, that yeah, this isn't out of the ordinary to have, you know, trans rhetoric, shoehorn NB people in, then we're even more inclined to speak out against that, because these are the conversations right now. Like obviously this isn't like monumental by any means, but you can't challenge the rhetoric unless you challenge the fucking rhetoric. So here
I'm
we
okay
are.
with challenging parts of the rhetoric. So one part of the rhetoric is maybe the xenogender stuff. One part of the Jenny, it's absolutely true. This experience is really common that like trans people will try to go to like a trans space and then they'll have a bunch of non-binary people and just be like, what the fuck is happening here? These people aren't having my experience. So I want to say that's absolutely true that happens. Like I'm not trans, but like I know that, right? Like so when you say that, I 100% believe it and it's true. And I think there has to be some parts of the conversation that have to be dedicated to maybe separating the groups a little bit to an extent. I don't want, not entirely, but there should be groups for trans women who are transitioning, and they should be exclusive to those people, and they should be exclusive to their struggles, and they shouldn't just let everyone in, because obviously that makes no fucking sense.
I actually
And I
do
think
sort of
maybe,
agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, maybe there have been too many, like we've gone so far in one direction that we're just like including everyone, and no one can really talk about their experiences. So I think that's fair enough.
Okay, I mean, if you think I'm being cruel,
Holy
as
shit,
well,
face.
I just want to say that this has developed over a very long period of time. I used to identify as non-binary, if you can believe it, a few years ago. This has come over time as I have found that my attempts to speak about binary trans experience have just been further and further marginalized over time. That whenever, and now it's at the point where, you know, whenever I voice basic trans medicalist opinions, if I just say I don't think non-binary people exist, I get death threats. I get people telling me to kill myself if I mention.
Yeah, but that is a different view, to be fair, right? That's a different view. Then we should differentiate ourselves from this group. Like, there are different struggles. We need to focus on our own issues. Like, you can say that and then still be like, I do think non-binary people are like valid and exist.
Even
right?
just trying to create different spaces is perceived as transphobic. And
No, I
sidelined
agree
for
that
that.
that's probably true often. I do agree that's probably
Okay.
true often. But I'm
Well,
saying,
I'm
like,
telling you
the way
that
you framed it was different. So.
this is the reality of how this has played out. Okay,
Well,
and
dude,
that's
I
what I'm working
understand.
with
I
right now.
interact with like annoying, like 15-year-old like neopronoun users. I get it, right? I get
They
annoyed
aren't
by
just
them too.
15-year-olds.
Okay, sure, whatever. They are not all 15. I understand, right? I have some of the same annoyances.
But
as you,
you're
and
saying
I
that to
get
trivialize it, so it is
No,
important that they aren't all
okay.
15. A lot of them are a lot
Can you
older
admit
than
though
that.
that they are disproportionately like fucking children who will probably grow out of it?
Not children. I'd say late teens to 20s, most of them. 18 to 25 is probably the biggest age bracket.
Huh. I don't know. I feel like I would disagree, but it's just like an empirical dispute, not that interesting.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, I don't know. I like if someone else wants to move the conversation in a new direction, or if you feel like I haven't responded to anything.
Yeah,
love to
you
respond. I
said
just
something. You'd said something kind of like conceding ground, or not conceding ground, but ceding ground to the idea of the separation of advocating for these things. Is there a way, do you think, Yoon, to say like, okay, like the trans positive movement, like broadly, like on the progressive side, we're going to differentiate between advocating for binary trans people and non-binary trans people in a way that's not going to harm us politically when talking to conservatives, right? Like, do you think is there a way to do that? Or are we at to the point where if we walk back any sort of thing, like, okay, maybe we exclude the non-binary people in this particular space, they're going to weaponize that against us to say, like, even we recognize, you know, in some whatever manner.
Yeah, so I think the progressive tendency to just think that everything is just like a straight line up and forward, and we have to go as far as possible in every single direction and defend everything, and if we give any sort of ground anywhere, then we lose everything. I think that's probably the incorrect attitude to take, and I think that's probably extended to like the non-binary stuff where now it's just like, okay, you have to include everyone because we like inclusiveness and dislike gender roles. So I think it's fine to acknowledge that, and it's fine to have exclusive spaces, but I don't think that necessitates exclusion from like a shared umbrella. So for example, I don't know how I guess Neve and Jenny feel about the LGBT acronym, but I guess that's an example of like the umbrella we're talking about. Like, I'm totally fine with that, and I'm fine with non-binary people being under the T part because I feel like it's effective enough. I feel like we have enough history there, and just because there's real difficulties, and I want to acknowledge that real difficulties in figuring out like what is actually a shared experience here and what percentage of people are like literally just trending and like fucking over the movement. Like, I think those are fair discussions to have, but I don't think that necessitates throwing everyone who is non-binary to the curb, basically, because I think on their own the movement may succeed in for non-binary people, and I understand that you don't have to be invested in them necessarily because of the differences, but I think it's just fundamental to being a progressive, really, is that you care about people who are like different, even if it's at cost to you. We ask that of conservatives to pay more in taxes. We ask of, I guess, white people to like fucking acknowledge their privilege, or at least we did before it became fucking cringe as fuck. That's another thing ruined by online leftists. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's kind of just progressive.
Yeah, bro. But just
theory
because we
to
care
really
about
just
a bunch of
be-
people doesn't mean we have to like. It still means we can compartmentalize, right? Like if I drop,
I'm saying that we have to do that. We have to do that more, is what I'm saying, actually. But I'm just saying, it's kind of just a part of leftist advocacy, in my view. Like, it's very fundamental philosophically, is that we advocate for people who are less fortunate than us, even if it comes at cost to us. This isn't exclusive to trans people. It's not exclusive to white people. It doesn't matter what group you're a part of, if you're marginalized or not. If there's someone lower on the ladder, you pull them up.
True.
Yes, and no one is saying don't advocate for trans or for non-binary people. I don't think anyone's saying for that, right? We're like, I think we're all in agreement that they.
Is no one saying that though?
I think
I'm kind of saying that, but
Yeah.
what I'm really saying is get these people out of my umbrella. Okay?
Yeah, that's
they can
yeah,
go,
that's
if they want to go and do their own
yes.
thing, then
All right,
whatever. I wouldn't
listen,
really care.
Tom has got to go. Thank you, Tom, for being here. I appreciate your voice, and I appreciate
See you later.
your white man energy.
Always
Okay,
good to see you, Tom.
and it's good to have some minority representation on this
Gotta have
panel.
more white
okay?
men with goatees
All
on
right.
here.
Yeah, we need more
Yes,
cis white men in this
you are
conversation.
the only white man who has provided
In
a
black
voice.
shirts.
All right, so
This
I
is the
appreciate
second
it.
time in a row we've worn nearly the same. Last time we had button-ups on. This time we both got black shirts on.
Yeah, every time I wear a button up, I end up taking my shirt off, so I gotta wear shirts without buttons from now on. But yeah, before I go, I did want to say, like, but generally my idea around this stuff is that I think most of the progress comes through education on what gender is, separating gender from sex, getting people to understand that gender dysphoria is mostly sex dysphoria and how it kind of affects people in these ways. And I think that a lot of these movements are conflating a lot of these ideas and making it more confusing to where even if these aren't the focuses of what conservatives are doing to get rid of trans rights, these are things that are making it to where they're more likely to want to get rid of trans rights. These are things that make it a lot more confusing and make it a lot harder to understand, to where educating the people on these things isn't actually something that it seems like we're moving towards anymore. It seems like we're moving away from educating people and just making just muddying the waters more and more. So if that wasn't the case, yeah, again, I'm happy with people identifying as whatever they want. I just don't like that they conflate it with gender. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks, guys.
Very well. Thank you so much, Tom. Farewell.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you.